And you're on.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. The clock is just ticking round to the 9:30 mark there on the computer. Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor June Clark and I'll be chairing this meeting this morning of the Central and East Planning Committee. We do have a busy agenda this morning and we do have several speakers who at this moment are waiting in the lobby. This meeting is being live screened to the County Council's website. And I would ask if people can observe certain protocols. One of the most important is that while you're waiting to speak, if you could leave your microphone on mute, please. And most people do have a chat function on the top line of their screen. If you would like to speak, could you indicate by typing RTS, which is right to speak, and that will come through to me and then I will deal with those in order. If you don't have the right to speak on your screen, could you just simply press the hand signal and somebody will prompt me that you're also wishing to speak. So as well, the normal protocols, if we remember to have all our mobile phones on silent, if unfortunately it does go off while you're speaking, it's a bit disruptive to the meeting. I'll move over now onto the agenda. Before I do that, actually, I will introduce some of the key players in the Central and East Planning Committee. I've already introduced myself, and so normally if we were in the council chamber, I would start from my right-hand side, and so I'll start with Ian.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Ian Croft. I'm the Senior Democratic Services Officer for this morning's meeting.
Thank you, Ian. And do we have Martin with us this morning?
Yes, Chair. Martin Tyndall, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Martin. And normally to my right, I have Neil Carter. Neil, are you with us?
Yes, morning, Chair. Neil Carter. I'm the solicitor to the committee.
Thank you, Neil. So then moving over to my left, I have Sarah Eldridge, Senior Planning Officer.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, Sarah Eldridge, I'm the area team leader for the Central and East.
Thank you, Sarah. So with those introductions done, as and when we come to various parts on the agenda, there may be other officers who are waiting to come in should they be needed for advice. I will introduce those people nearer the time and when it's appropriate to the particular item. So thank you all for being there in the wings, as it were. So I'll move over now onto the agenda for this meeting this morning. And the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. So Ian, have we been given any apologies for absence?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillors Cochrane, Iverson and Hawley.
Thank you, Ian. And do we have any substitute members?
Yes, we have Councillor Linda Marshall substituting for Councillor Iverson.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 3 on the agenda, and this is the minutes of the meeting which are held on the 13th of October 2020, and they are pages 3 to 28 in the pack. Can I ask the committee if they have any amendments to those minutes? They're quite lengthy. I don't intend to go through them page by page, but if you could just indicate, please, committee, if any of those who were present actually, if you have any corrections or anything you'd like to flag up about those minutes. I'll give everybody a few seconds to come forward.
If not, Chairman, I'd like to move those minutes.
I'll just thank you, Councillor Lang. I'll just give people another. I know it's a bit difficult when you're trying to get yourself off mute and all the rest of it, but there isn't anybody who's indicated that there's any amendments. So thank you, Councillor Lang, for agreeing those minutes. Do we have a seconder?
I'll formally second the minutes, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Paul Taylor. So with that, I'll move on to item 4, which is a very important part of the agenda, and that is if anybody has any declarations of interest in any of the items on the agenda, and that will be for committee members to declare now. But as always, if something occurs to you as you're going through the particular item, then it can always be raised then, but it is always very important to raise those items. So thank you, committee. Now we'll move on to item 5, which are the actual applications, and we have 3 applications this morning. Each has a different planning officer will be given the presentation. So item 5A is Tiana Lane, Pittington Road, Rainton Gate. and this is for the erection of a single-storey dwelling. Now, this report was compiled by one of our officers, John Russell. However, this morning this presentation is going to be given by Alan Doby. So, Alan, if I can move over to you now, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair, members and speakers. If you bear with me, I'll load up the presentation. It may take a minute or two. Right, hopefully you can all see that now.
Can we have two speakers to this item, Alan? So can we have some indication from them that they can actually see this presentation and they can hear what's being said? I'm thinking particularly of Chantal Morrison and Councillor David Hall.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. And
thank you.
So you can see that as well, Chantal. Okay, that's great. It wouldn't be fair if we'd gone ahead with this and you were disadvantaged by not being able to see. Thanks for the confirmation. Right, Alan, sorry about that slight delay there. If you can go through the presentation now.
That's fine. So I take it it's displaying properly there. Everybody can see that fine. Good. Okay. Right. Well, as the title page says, it's the proposal for a single-storey dwelling at Tiana Lane at Pittington Road at Rainton Gate. Various maps, drawings and things which I'll talk us through. That's just basically the site location plan that identifies the application site with the red outline. The bulk of the site is a sort of large square area to the back of the main road with a narrow access road leading to that past the adjacent property called the Roans. This is an aerial view, which obviously shows the site in the sort of context. What it shows there, I think, is the handful of properties which it sits behind, all reasonably sized, detached properties, each in fairly sizable grounds, on the left-hand side of Pittington Road. You'll see to the top left corner the A690, which runs through from Durham to the bottom left, up through towards Houghton and Sunderland to the north. I think it's important to note there's quite a busy junction that Pittington Road joins the A690 with, and I'll come on to mention that a little bit further on. A slightly further zoomed out view, again to show probably a slightly better context as regards how much surrounding countryside there is around the site itself, and shows the positions of nearest dwellings and also the complex of Homer Hill Farm, which is just to the south of that, which some members may know from visiting. It's quite a popular farm shop. Just some photographs to show the context of the site itself. This is the driveway leading into the site. It has been tarmacked fairly recently, I believe. So it shows the fence line of the adjacent property called the Roans on the right-hand side of that. This is as you get to the end of the drive, and it's a view just simply into the site itself, looking vaguely in the sort of Durham and Ramside direction. This is a view of the northern part of the site. Shows an existing mobile home that's on the site, which I believe the applicants are currently living in. That mobile home doesn't yet have any planning permission confirmed on it. It's a situation that's currently under investigation by the planning and enforcement team. So whilst it's there and members will note its presence on the site, it isn't really relevant to the current consideration that we're looking at today. That's a view towards the south of the site from the site itself, and that's looking towards Homer Hill Farm, the various farm buildings and the car park there. Again, a view to the west of the site towards Durham direction. And that's a view back out onto Pittington Road from the site itself and along the driveway. That's a site plan showing the proposals and where they'd be located within the site itself. So it's effectively a rectangular shaped bungalow that would sit behind the property called the Roans. It would have its own parking spaces, as you see there, with the facility to turn and drive out in a forward direction, and garden land to the rear. The elevations of the bungalow, it's relatively low level, quite a long elevation to it, but reasonably well screened from the main road, so not widely visible. And obviously the height helps to reduce the prominence of it to a certain extent. That's the layout of the bungalow, showing fundamentally 3 bedrooms and then the usual sort of living room, dining room, kitchen areas and bathrooms and such like. Just to show the greenbelt context, the report does obviously go into some detail in terms of the greenbelt implications. The top map simply shows the site again as a location. The bottom map shows shaded in a sort of olive green area the greenbelt designation. That's been in place for a long time, predates the former Durham City Plan. As you can see, it cuts off just on the Pittington Road itself. So the properties fronting that on the left-hand side are actually within the green belt. The properties on the other side are white, so that is outside the green belt boundary. And then the green belt clearly extends across the A690 to take inland further north. Again, that's the wider context of the green belt. So clearly it's quite an extensive area that's been designated there. Includes mostly countryside, but obviously there are some properties included within that as well. But that, the green belt considerations and restrictions still apply, even where there are built up parts of the green belt. So just in terms of the responses we've had on consultations, Northumbrian Water have offered no objections. They've simply provided some advice for dealing with surface water drainage if planning permission is granted. The Highway Authority have offered no objections, and they confirm that the provision for bin storage close to the access in the public highway is acceptable. The consultee responses from internal departments. The spatial policy team point out that in terms of national guidance, which is the National Planning Policy Framework, a dwelling would impact on the openness of the green belt. It would be inappropriate development and would by definition be harmful to the green belt. And they feel that such development should not be approved except in very special circumstances. The landscape team feel that the proposal will be sited within the countryside, outside of any defined settlement boundary, and they feel that a dwelling on this site would encroach on the countryside and further erode the rural character and openness of the green belt in this location. The design and conservation team were consulted, merely from a design aspect. It's not a designated area in terms of conservation or anything like that. But I think they were simply consulted on design issues. They feel that the information doesn't really justify a dwelling in this location, and regarding design would result in a dwelling of fairly simple design but with little architectural merit. Contaminated land feel there would need to be conditions requiring a land contamination scheme because of previous uses of the site. Nuisance action team raised no objection, and they provide advice regarding achieving acceptable noise levels in the dwelling. I think that would mainly relate to traffic noise from the Pittington Road and also the A690, which is not far away as well. No objections have been raised in terms of air quality, drainage or ecology. Tree officers have assessed the tree report that was put in, and they're quite happy with that. They note that 1 tree will be removed, others are in good health, but note that they will be retained as part of the development. At the time of preparing the report, we hadn't received any letters either of support or objection, but since the report was published, we have had some submissions. We've had an email from Councillor Kellett, the local member, who supports the officer's recommendation because of the concerns that have been expressed regarding green belt and such like. We've also had 4 letters of support that came via Councillor Hall on behalf of the applicants, and they're from the likes of the school, the health visiting service and traveller organisations. Their main points of support are that the family are currently living in a caravan, which they don't feel is appropriate necessarily, that they are settled in the area and want to remain part of the community, that the children have become established in the local school, and that obviously mental health and well-being are very important in the current times particularly. So looking at planning considerations, they're listed there, and obviously there's a lot of detail in the report on all of those individual items. So it's the principle of development, the impact on openness of the countryside and green belt, the impact on character and appearance of the area, residential amenity, sustainability, highway safety and parking, and then ecology. So we'll just look at those in a bit more detail. As regards the principle of development, the County Durham Plan is now in force, having been adopted in October. So that is now the statutory development plan and the starting point for determining applications. The site is a greenfield site, but it's also located within the Durham City Greenbelt. The site sits behind an existing property which was constructed before the Greenbelt boundaries were established. So I think that points out that there is clearly development that was already in the Greenbelt area prior to this. The development hasn't occurred since the Greenbelt was designated initially. The proposal in that sense would be contrary to County Durham Plan Policy 10, which is developed in the countryside, and also the NPPF Section 13, which relates to protecting Greenbelt land. The application hasn't demonstrated, as far as we're concerned, any very special circumstances to comply with the exceptions afforded by Policy 10 or the Greenbelt requirements. So looking in more detail on the openness of the countryside and Greenbelt, Policy 20 in the local plan states that proposals will be determined in accordance with the NPPF, and paragraph 143 of that states that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. The construction of a new dwelling as proposed is considered to be inappropriate development because it doesn't qualify under any of the exemptions, which tend to be things like agricultural and leisure developments, which are clearly already located in the Greenbelt area. The site is not viewed as a previously developed site. I think the applicants have indicated some reference to previous coal and rail related uses, which are shown on some historic mapping, but these have long since ceased, and the site, we feel, can now be considered as a greenfield site. There is no current evidence of any previous development on there. No special circumstances have been identified within the application. So on that basis, the proposal is contrary to Policy 20 of the County Durham Plan and the NPPF. In terms of the character and appearance of the area, it is located within the countryside and beyond the residential framework and the built-up part of this particular locality. And we feel because of being set behind the existing dwellings, it doesn't relate particularly well to the established built form. And it's in that sense that we feel in incongruent addition to the existing landscape. Regarding impact on residential amenity, that's effectively its relationship with the adjacent dwellings. We don't feel there's any particular issues in that respect. It's far enough away not to cause any particular adverse impacts as regards overbearing because of its height, or in terms of loss of privacy because of the boundary enclosures and the distancing standards. So there isn't a particular concern in planning terms regarding that. Looking at sustainability, the site isn't within a settlement and by definition is therefore in the countryside. Because of its particular location, we feel that the occupiers would need to rely very heavily on the use of the private car for daily needs. The nearest settlement of any size with facilities is Pittington, Low Pittington rather, to the south. That's about 1.5 kilometres away, so that's really too far of a distance for people to be expected to go and do shopping and such like without using the car. It's also an unlit road, although there is a footpath there. To go in the other direction, West Drayton is across the A690. For those who don't know it, it is a very busy road, and it's a very difficult manoeuvre to try and get across there because you're crossing two carriageways across to the central reservation and then across into West Drayton. So again, in terms of trying to do that on foot, we don't feel that that's a particularly safe procedure to have to follow, particularly for taking children to school. So in that context, we feel that the development is not a sustainable location, although there clearly are other dwellings already there. And in that context, the proposal will be contrary to Policy 21, which relates to delivering sustainable transport and looks to minimise the need to use private cars as the only or main source of transport. In terms of highway and safety and parking, there aren't any particular highway issues identified there. The access arrangements are considered to be fine, and obviously there's parking within the site for vehicles associated with the dwelling. And no ecological issues have been identified here to cause any concern. So this comes to our conclusions on the site. To run through those, the proposal is felt to be inappropriate development within the green belt and therefore by definition is harmful. Additional harm does arise because of the impact on the countryside and sustainability issues. The benefits of the proposal are limited to a very modest boost to housing supply and obviously construction jobs in the local economy when the house is being built. But the contribution to housing supply is notably reduced because the council can comfortably demonstrate a housing land supply in excess of 5 years. And obviously that's through the County Durham plan process that's been brought forward. The application does refer to personal circumstances of the family, but unfortunately we don't feel that these are sufficient to outweigh the harm due to the inappropriateness of development within the greenbelt. The application and the supporting information as presented to us fail in our view to demonstrate very special circumstances which would be required by policy 20 of the County Durham plan and paragraph 145 of the NPPF. And on this basis, the proposal is felt to be unacceptable. And that concludes the presentation. I'll be happy to answer questions further on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan, for that presentation. I'm sure that's given the committee a lot of food for thought. We seem to have an echo. I think that's solved it now. Thank you, Alan. So now it's time to move over to the speakers. And Councillor David Hall, we've already clarified that you are there waiting to come in. So if you can, you've already sent round some information to the committee, but I'll hand over to you now to give your representations, please. Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me okay?
I can see you, Councillor Hall. Everybody else is nodding, so.
That's good. Just always good to check. So good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favour of this application today. As a county councillor for Sherman Division, I respectfully request committee members to please grant this application, which is for a modest one-storey family home. I hope you will have had time to consider the statement I emailed committee members yesterday afternoon, and so I will try to keep my comments concise to avoid unnecessary repetition. I would like to address the main and only issue really directly, which is that of the Greenbelt designation. As we all know, the Greenbelt was applied to large swathes of land of different types and uses, including, in this instance, residential streets of houses and small plots of land behind them. If it were not for a Greenbelt designation applied to this small plot, then this application would probably have been granted without much delay. The Greenbelt designation creates a fog of semantic planning arguments, which in this instance loses sight of the simple truth, which is that this is a relatively small, discrete, enclosed plot of land adjacent to existing houses and a local business, none of whom object, with no impact on the adjacent areas, and is a sensible place for this new home. Through its Greenbelt designation, the report has by default considered it in open countryside, but in reality, it is no such thing. It does not incur into the open countryside, and it is already naturally enclosed and screened, such that you would be hard pressed to spot it now or once built. The planning team's report confirms this. It is an underused plot of land sitting so far helplessly and mostly redundantly beside existing larger houses that were built prior to the Greenbelt designation. There are no objections to this application, only letters of support. It is sustainable development because it is within walking distance of the local primary school, pub, shops, and is a 1-minute walk from several local and inter-town bus routes, not least on the A690, which is a short distance away at the top of the street and which will have traffic lights and a pedestrian crossing installed next year for easier access to West Rainton, and also Low Pittington Crossroads, which is at the bottom of the street. There is a fantastic farm shop selling a whole range of food and goods just next door. The applicant family themselves are currently living with extended family in overcrowded premises, which they're trying hard to resolve. They are an embedded part of the local community through their family, upbringing, profession, support network, children doing well at the local primary school, but also through their involvement and volunteering in the community, which has included most recently raising thousands of pounds for local COVID and community projects. Thomas is a hard-working local who's made himself a very successful professional boxer and uses his experience and skills mentoring young people in the village through the local youth project, with a special focus on children and young people that may be harder to reach. The fact that the young family simply wish to have a home in their local village on their own plot of land for their family's needs. This application is a sensible development and a good use of underused land, formerly industrial, but long since turned green and now perfect for a new home. There are no objections nor any real or physical harm to give any weight to. Thankfully, we have planning committees with the democratically given powers to fairly weigh matters and make the decision in the best interests of all concerned, including the applicant and the community, both of which I would respectfully argue are best served by granting this application. Planning officers have confirmed to me that it is open to the committee to weigh the circumstances for themselves, and it is perfectly within the committee's power to grant the application should they wish to, with no precedent set for any future similar applications. In summary, the proposed one-storey development does not breach or harm the principles and aims of the Greenbelt and serves the important purpose of providing a much-needed family home through a respectful use of this available, screened and underused space next to existing houses. I therefore respectfully request that the committee grant the application for this family home, please, with any conditions planning officers see fit to apply to the grant. Thank you for considering this application and supporting statement.
Thank you for that information, Councillor Hall. That does give the committee more information and food for thought. We do also have a registered speaker in Chantel, who I believe is the applicant. And I'm sorry to use your Christian name, Chantel, because we have two names down as a surname. We have a Chantel Ward and a Chantel Morrison, so I hope you don't mind me referring to you as Chantel. I understand you would like to speak, so you do have up to 5 minutes. So if you would like to speak now, is that all right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I'm Chantal and this is Tommy. We would love to build our house because we have lived in the area all our lives. We were both brought up on the Travellers site, which has been welcomed by the community of West Wrighton. There's no availability on the sites for us, and we're not priority for the council bills. We aren't able to get a mortgage for a house that we would need because Tommy is self-employed. As we are from the travelling community, we do face a lot of discrimination. So if we were to travel, this would be an big impact on our mental health. Our 2 or 3 kids go to the West Wrighton school and have settled very well. They are thriving in education. If we got a smaller house, we would still need planning permission for an extension. It's more cost effective for us to build on our land we have owned for many years. We currently live in a caravan on the land of Tommy's parents. With 10 adults and 13 kids, it's very cramped. There is lots of animosity between the family because of the overcrowding. We don't want to fall out. We want to keep the strong bond we have and we rely on the family for support. If we revert back to our travelling routes, it would have a big impact on the mental health and well-being of myself and my family. Our children would have to leave the school for months upon end. We have a good relationship with our doctors, health visitors and our education. What would be hard to rebuild because we wouldn't be in the same place for long. Tommy is a very well-respected member in the local community and a great role model. He supports all the local events and fundraisers. He also volunteers a lot of his time to help others. We have full support of our neighbours and our property would fit in with the surroundings. We will not be removing any of the trees on our land and we'd only be digging up less than half the grass for our house. Thank you for your listening. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Chantel. Very well said. I applaud you. It's not easy speaking in front of a council planning committee, but well done.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So at this point, Alan, is there anything you'd like to come in with before we go over to the committee?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think it's probably helpful to cover some of the points that the 2 speakers raised there. Firstly, I think in terms of Councillor Hall and the Greenbelt issues, unfortunately, Greenbelt is the fundamental concern here, and really, unless we agree very special circumstances, there isn't really any subjectivity to this. The NPPF makes it quite clear that, and I can quote it from you, inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. The exceptions, as I alluded to earlier, are things like buildings for agricultural forestry, facilities for sport or outdoor recreation, which are clearly already located there, cemeteries and things like that. It allows for the extension, alteration of existing buildings, replacement of a building, limited infilling in villages. So there really isn't anything as regards an exception that we can apply here. And so, we are actually left with the very special circumstances. Obviously, we've heard a lot from Chantel, which I think is very impressive, the family background and things like that. And we have a lot of sympathy for the situation they find themselves in. But I don't think really in planning terms that is sufficient to count as very special circumstances that would override the green belt. Councillor Hall also said that he felt that the proposal would have been granted otherwise. I'm not necessarily agreeable with that. We have pointed out in the report that this is an unsustainable location in our view because of its location relative to shopping and other facilities. Yes, there's a farm shop nearby, but that doesn't provide the full range of shopping, and clearly there would still need to be supermarket trips. And as I say, because of the location, we would certainly consider that trying to cross the A690 on foot as being an extremely dangerous manoeuvre to have to do. So, in our view, it's far more likely that someone would use the car to get across into West Drayton for the school trips and for major shopping trips. I think overall we do feel that the approval of the proposal would actually undermine Greenbelt principles here. We don't feel, as I say, that the very special circumstances exist to warrant an approval here. So unfortunately, I think our recommendation still remains the same. Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Councillor Hall, I see that you've got a hand up wishing to speak, but actually you've had the opportunity to speak. So unless it's about another completely different issue, I'm afraid we need to go over to the committee now. So with that, we'll move over to the committee, and there's lots of things there to give their deliberations on. Now then, I can't see who has indicated they want to speak. Oh, Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yeah, Chairman, I get quite irate when I see this, when we speak about things being unsustainable. Something that's unsustainable is 50 miles from somewhere. Something that's a mile or half a mile from somewhere is sustainable. And the special circumstance for me would be it's allowing local people to stay in the local area, for their kids to go to the local school. And I think we've got to support this, and I'll move approval of the application on that basis. And the fact is, there's no objections from any residents. That's the main thing.
Thank you, Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Paul Taylor, you'd like to speak.
Good morning, Chair. Councillor Paul Taylor, representing people of Brandon Division. Chair, I don't know really where to start here. This has got so far down the line. I shouldn't judge this on emotions, but I'm looking at a young family there. We've got so far down the line. We've got a roadway going in. We've got a site cleared. Why has it got to this state? Was there no pre-planning application? Was there no advice from anybody at all? This family's got so much hope. This is a home they're wanting to build here, and really speaking, if I want to be absolutely strict and down the line, which I always try to be, and be fair to everybody, of course, is it was never going to happen. It's in the green belt. And if I had a resident come to me, that's what I would advise them. But then I do have to take into consideration the personal circumstances. We have got a young family here. They want to be part of the community. They're doing lots of great work within the community. I think it is a sustainable location. Sorry to disagree with the planners here. And I'm really torn, I have to say. Normally, and everybody looking at me knows, I will stick to planning rules, regulations and policies very strictly, because that's what we're here to do. To stick to those policies. This is in the green belt. It really was a non-starter from start to. I'm not going to say from start to finish, because that's judging what we're going to do today. But I am torn, I have to say, Chair. I just feel this family have been maybe given false hope somewhere. I don't know, because and not to keep going over the same things. I am really torn, which is unusual for me. I do judge things on planning terms, as we all should do. but I really do feel for this family, Chair. So at this moment in time, I'll rest and listen to what other members have got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Now, Alan Doby, you've indicated you'd like to come back in now. So, Alan, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just to confirm that the applicants did actually ask for pre-application advice. They were given very firm advice that this wouldn't be acceptable, and for whatever reason have decided to proceed with the application. So they were certainly given very clear information that this was an inappropriate site for development. Thank you. Thank you,
Alan. That does answer that query. Is anybody else on the committee wanting to contribute to the debate? Councillor Lang. If you can unmute your microphone, yes, Councillor Lang. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Right. Would anybody else on the committee like to contribute to the discussion, please? Councillor Marshall.
I'd like to second Audrey, please.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Now, we also have a mover to go against the officer's recommendation by Councillor John Shuttleworth. Now, we do need a seconder for that motion, which was the first motion. Is anybody minded to second that motion to go against the officer's decision?
I'm quite prepared to second Councillor Shuttleworth's proposal.
Right, that's Councillor Brown. Right, I've got a few more people who are wishing to speak now. Councillor Davidson.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to come in and second Audrey's motion, but Linda got there like half a second before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. Well, if we've come to the end of the road with the debate and that the information is sufficient for councillors to make a decision this morning, we do have two motions on the table, and I will need to go with the first motion that was raised, and that is the motion by Councillor John Shuttleworth to go against the officer's recommendation. And as usual, and I'm anticipating Neil jumping in any second now, you will need to give reasons, Councillor Shuttleworth, as to why you feel that is the case. So I'll just bring Neil in before we go to that. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So the key policy test here is, as we've heard, about the green belt. So the development is inappropriate development in the green belt by definition. So the starting point is that there's harm arising by reason of that inappropriateness. In order to approve the development, members would need to be of the view that the circumstances are such that they clearly outweigh the harm by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm that's been identified. And we've heard about additional harm in terms of sustainability. Members may agree or disagree with that. The other additional harm that officers have identified is the open countryside, so the sort of visual impact on the character and appearance of that location. So that's the key policy test. Are the circumstances which exist which clearly outweigh that harm that's identified? Clearly, officers have said that in their view, the personal circumstances of the applicant, although they amount to material planning consideration, wouldn't be sufficient. So it would be, in order to approve, members would have to be of the view that those circumstances are sufficient to outweigh that harm. So I think what I'd like to hear from Councillor Shuttleworth is perhaps some further detail as to what those material planning considerations are that he feels outweighs the harm, and what if we get to a point where it proceeds to a vote on that, we'll also need to discuss conditions, because there need to be a standard suite of conditions, and I'd probably pass over to Alan Doby just to outline what those conditions would be.
Thank you for that clarification, Neil. So to allow for a little bit more thought to be given to that, Councillor Shuttleworth, I'm going to move on to Councillor Paul Taylor, who has indicated he'd like to speak. Councillor Taylor.
Hi, Chair. Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to advise Councillor Shuttleworth that, you know, he could progress this by saying that he takes a country view to what our officers have said. I'm by no means saying I'm supporting him here, but all that Councillor Shuttleworth has to do to justify what he has done is to say he takes the country view to the officers' views. And to me, that is quite acceptable when we're looking at an application of approving an application rather than turning down an application. So if Councillor Shuttleworth wants to do that, I'm not saying I support him, but he's well within his rights as an elected member to say he takes the opposite view, and the reasons are the opposite reasons to what the officers give. Of course they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So you have had a few minutes to deliberate there, Councillor Shuttleworth and Councillor Brown. So would you like to offer anything else to your motion?
Yes, most certainly. I mean, it's allowing local people. We hear every week on the TV and in the papers about local people in the countryside not being able to have homes, buy homes because of the cost of them. The fact this allows these people to stay in that area with 3 kids that just would help the school, and the fact that the shops aren't that far away, it far outweighs the idea of refusing it. And I just think it should be allowed on that basis. There are exceptional circumstances. Plus, this person contributes to the local community, training young kids boxing or whatever.
Thank you, Councillor Shuttleworth.
I would just like to add, Chair, that the comment about the green belt, but also about going into the countryside and agricultural land, to me, this is just a useless little corner that wants development, crying out for a development, crying out for a house. It's not going to intrude on anybody's privacy. There's no objections whatsoever. And it's just, to me, it's a useless little corner that would benefit from having a property on it. And that's my personal view. It's common sense. I'm sorry about planning details and planning rules, but all I can say, this is common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So, Neil, are we in a position where we can go to the vote on that motion?
Yes. So yes, Chair. Subject to conditions. I mean, I think just to summarise what members are saying is that the applicant's personal circumstances, together with the sustainability credentials of the site, and I heard some mention of, I think, assistance in terms of sustainability of the school with pupils, etc. Those circumstances, in members' view, sufficient to clearly outweigh the greenbelt harm that's been identified. So in those circumstances, I think it can be put to the vote. But just before we do that, I'd like to hear from Alan Dobie just about what conditions would be appropriate, and clearly would need to have a delegated authority for that to be agreed in due course if that vote's carried.
Yeah, I think that's entirely sensible, and I'm sure both Councillor Shuttleworth and Councillor Brown would agree with that too, and we've got some nods. So
Yes.
Thank you. If you can come in with some suggestions there, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the application itself because I wasn't case officer, but I mean, the obvious things that occur to me, there was mention of contaminated land, so we'd certainly need to have a formal contaminated land assessment of the site to ensure there would be no adverse impacts on the residents there. We'd potentially need to control the materials and also potentially have a landscaping scheme to try and mitigate the impacts of the development on the countryside. They're the obvious things. I may probably have to dig a little bit further into the case, but certainly we could come back to Chair and Vice Chair to have those endorsed at some point.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Shuttleworth, Councillor Brown, are they acceptable to yourself?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Right, okay. So Neil, I believe we're in a position to go to a vote on that first motion, and for the benefit of anybody who hasn't been party to a planning committee meeting up to now, what will happen is that Neil will contact the members individually to take the vote and get their indication of which way they would like to vote or indeed abstain, and then we'll have the results. So thank you, Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to go to each member in turn and ask if you're for or against. And this is for the motion to approve the application subject to conditions. So I'll start with Councillor Brown. Are you for or against that, Councillor Brown?
I'm obviously approving.
Okay.
Recommend approval.
Thank you. I'll next go to Councillor Corrigan.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Coult.
Against.
Councillor Davidson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner. Is Councillor Gardner with us today? Okay, I'm not sure if Councillor Gardner's present. We'll move on to Councillor Lang.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Manchester.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Against.
Councillor Robinson.
Against.
Councillor Shuttleworth.
For.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Taylor.
With the extra information kindly provided, I am against.
Okay, thank you. So, Chair, that's 9 votes to 2 against the motion.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for that committee. So that motion has fallen. So we will now move over to the second motion, which is to support the officer's recommendation. And so we will repeat that same process if councillors can indicate their views, please. So over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the vote to refuse the application. So again, I'm going to come to each member and ask if you're for or against that. And I'll start with Councillor Brown.
You're on mute, Councillor Brown.
Against the motion.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Corrigan.
For officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Coult.
For officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lang.
For the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Manchester.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
For the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Shuttleworth.
Against.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Taylor.
For.
Thank you. Chair, that's 9 to 2 in favour of that motion for refusal.
Thank you, Neil. So the decision on that plan application is to go along with the officer's recommendation and to refuse this this development. Thank you, committee. I'll give everybody a few moments there before we move on to the next item. Ian, have we been able to establish whether Councillor Gardner is actually with us? I didn't recall any apologies being given.
No, Chair, he's not with us.
Right, okay, so we know where we go from here. Right, thank you, committee. So now we will move on to item 5B. And this is land to the south of Flassvale House on Ainsley Street in Durham. And this is for retention of use of land for 2 car parking spaces. And this application is going to be presented by Lisa Marina. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just open my presentation. If you can give me a couple of moments to open that up. Okay, yeah, as Chair said, this application is for the retention of the use of the land for 2 car parking spaces, and it's at on land to the south of Flassville House, Ainsley Street in Durham. So the application site, edged red on the location plan, is an area of land which sits at the edge of a cul-de-sac location on Ainsley Street in Durham. The status of the land is unclear. However, an established historic route exists in this area. The parking spaces are proposed to be in association with a previous development which was carried out for some residential development at the former Companions Club, which sits just to the north of the site. So here we have an aerial view of the site. The land actually sits underneath the tree coverage, but the red line there shows the approximate location of the site. This is a photograph which shows how the land used to look. As you can see, that there has been previously used sort of informally for parking. There's also been a container stored on the site at some point in the past. This is a photograph which shows how the site looks now. Obviously the development has already been carried out, so we can see it as it would remain. It's constructed of a gravel surface with a low-level wooden fence around it, and there's a chain link towards the front of the site. In respect of consultee comments, there was no objection from our highways team, Northumbrian Water. In respect of design and conservation, they considered that the proposal would have a neutral impact. We did, however, receive an objection from the Public Rights of Way team. We received 13 letters of objection to the scheme, and these have been detailed within the report. These included objections from the City of Durham Parish Council and also a ward councillor for the area. The main planning considerations were the visual impact of the development on the conservation area and the surrounding listed buildings. As detailed within the report, they were considered to have a neutral impact on those. Residential amenity. No neighbouring properties are considered to be impacted upon as a result of this development. In respect of highway and public rights of way issues, no objection was raised from a highways viewpoint. While there are potential issues with regards to sort of highway status of the land and the impact on the historic route, it is not considered that this is for the planning system to consider this, and a determination of the application under the planning system can still be made on this application. And then obviously in respect of any other issues which were detailed within the report, which included information regarding ownership and possession of the land, which obviously have been considered within the report. So in conclusion, the impact upon the visual amenity of the conservation area and heritage assets, as well as the impact on residential amenity, is considered to be acceptable. The application is considered to meet the requirements of the NPPF, the County Durham Plan, and also the requirements of Section 66 and 72 of the Planning Listed Building and Conservation Area Act in respect of providing an acceptable impact on both listed buildings and the conservation area. In respect of the objections and concerns raised, these have been taken into account and addressed within the report. However, they were not felt to be of sufficient weight to justify refusal of the application in this instance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. There was a bullet point that you didn't mention there in that last slide. I don't know whether you want to go back over and develop that for the committee. The last slide that you had up there, the conclusion. You didn't go through bullet point 2.
Bear with me one moment, Chair. I'll go back to that slide. Apologies for that, Chair. It's just spinning. Was it to do with the public right of way?
I believe it was.
Yes.
It wasn't covered in the last bullet point.
So in respect, bring that back up now, Chair. Yeah, so obviously just to clarify as well, in respect of the public rights of way issues, as previously mentioned, there are potential issues with respect to that. They're not planning related. They can be considered under a separate legislation, and therefore this does not stop us making a decision on the current application in respect of planning. Any other issues could potentially be carried out would be dealt with under separate legislation and under a separate line of inquiry in that respect.
Right. Thank you for expanding on that one then, Lisa. So on this particular application, there's been quite a lot of interest, and we do have several speakers waiting in the wings, as it were. We do have with us, who will speak first this morning, Mr. Roger Cornwell, who is representing the Parish Council on this occasion. So, Mr. Cornwell, would you like to give your representations now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Well, I can hear, and most people are nodding, so welcome.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. We've got two arguments this morning, either of which should lead you to refuse this application. But I should start by saying we're at a bit of a disadvantage, because it was only with the publication of the committee report we learned of the legal opinion which was obtained by the applicant and forwarded to the planning officer, and this is not on the public record. We'd like to be able to read and assess this, and to give us that opportunity we'd need an adjournment, which we'd ask you to give us unless, and we think our arguments are persuasive, other reasons will cause you to refuse this application. I mean, if that legal opinion played any part in the officers reaching their decision, then it ought to be in the public record. But moving on, the first ground for refusing this is that it has an impact on historic assets. The lane itself is a historic route. It's actually shown on Thomas Forster's map of 1754. Others have said it's an ancient pilgrim route. While the parking bays, and you've seen the photograph, are at a relatively low level, the intention, of course, is that they should be used and cars should be parked in them. And the officer's report overlooks this point. We ask you to assess this with cars parked in those spaces. Within the lane is Flass Well, not Framwell, Flass Well, and it's clear from the multiple objectors, there's a lot of objectors here, that plans are well advanced to clear the vegetation further down the lane and to give better access. These parking bays obstruct that access. The clearing of that vegetation will also improve views of the Red Hills Miners' Hall. The report describes this as the view is not intentional, but it is valued, and in fact the Durham Miners Association commend it in a heritage statement on another planning application I was reading yesterday. Consequently, we do not agree with the conclusion that the impact is nil or neutral. There are policies you could use to refuse it. The first of these is policy 44 of the recently approved County Durham plan, which is summarised in paragraph 18 of your committee report. The other thing is the neighbourhood plan. This is now in its final form. There are no outstanding objections to it, and it's now with the County Council in its final form awaiting referendum. Under the coronavirus regulations, it now has very considerable weight. Policy H2 of the neighbourhood plan is relevant here. Those parking bays in use will not sustain or enhance the conservation area. The other one is policy H4. There is no understanding in the application of the significance of Red Hills or nor of the Flass Well. Now we turn to the highways issues, and I do take the point that there are other there's other legislation, and I'm not losing sight of that. But when the rights of way teams say that the status is unclear, they mean that they're unsure whether it's a footpath, a bridleway or a byway. They're not saying it isn't a highway, they're just not sure which sort of highway it is. There is a legal maxim of once a highway, always a highway. You can find that, in fact, on the County Council's own website. And there's a case back in 1903, which I could quote to you if provoked. The applicant accepts that a footpath exists running past the application site, and the surveyor in 1854, I said it was historic, said that this path was 15 feet wide. That will be the legal width of the footpath, and the applicant's got no right to narrow it to just 1.4 metres, which is less than 5 feet in old money. The route of Flass Lane, now Ainsley Street, is a green tongue that runs up to the Flass Well, and it's below the Miners' Hall at Red Hills. Quite aside from its legal status, it is part of the green infrastructure, and that's the subject of County Durham Plan Policy 26. I'm looking particularly at the bit of the policy that says development proposals will not be permitted that will result in the loss of open space or harm to green infrastructure assets unless the benefits of the development clearly outweigh that loss or harm, and an assessment has been undertaken which has clearly shown that the open space or land is surplus to requirements, and that has just not happened. We're coming now to the neighbourhood plan. Policy G1 also protects green infrastructure, and its relevant section says development proposals should have regard to the local distinctiveness, character, quality and biodiversity of public rights of way and other footpaths. Proposals which connect to improve or extend the network of public rights of way and improve its accessibility will be supported. What you should note here is that reference to other footpaths. The precise nature of the route isn't relevant to this neighbourhood plan policy. The parking bays block access unless you're a pedestrian, and narrow access if you are. There are plans afoot to improve this area, which the parking bays will make more difficult, and I understand later speakers can tell you more about these plans. So, just in conclusion, we agree with the conclusions of the rights of way team. They say this path is within the red line boundary. However, as mentioned, a land registry search reveals the land is unregistered. The applicant has not demonstrated that they own or are in control of the land. It is not clear, therefore, who will become responsible for maintaining or be liable to this path. If approval is granted, then this needs to be clarified, especially in the event of a trip or an accident. A third party, not the landowner nor the county council, as highway authority, has laid and improved the path surface. So I would assume that any potential future claims for public liability will be directed towards the third party. Furthermore, the proximity of a path directly next to a residential property can create amenity and or antisocial issues. This would become a concern given the narrowness of the path and could lead to a desire to close up or stop up the remainder of the path. And they say we cannot support the application as it restricts public access by means of fencing from the full width of the lane to a narrow 1.4 metre width alongside the residential property. So for all of these reasons, good policies in both the neighbourhood plan and the County Durham plan, we urge you to refuse this application. And if I've overrun my time slightly, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you for that, Mr. Cornwell. You always have extremely interesting and relevant presentations, and I'm sure the committee welcome all of the presentations that you bring to us. I'm just wondering at this point, before we move to the other speakers, if I should bring Neil in about a couple of those points, or would you prefer to wait, Neil?
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak now on those. I mean, I think that sort of 3 points that have been raised there that call for a response in terms of legal issues are the disclosure or non-disclosure of the barrister's opinion that's been submitted as part of the applicant's case. There is a separate process for those requests to be made. the objector's request has been referred to the appropriate team within the council for that to be progressed. Does it make a difference? My advice would be no, it doesn't. For a couple of reasons. There's no sort of great mystery as to what the council's position is in terms of the status of the application site, and that is simply that we feel we don't have sufficient evidence at the present time to assert it's a highway, and that's essentially the position that the applicant takes on that as well. Secondly, even if it was to be a highway, so even if we had the necessary evidence to assert it as such, that would not necessarily impact in terms of the officer's assessment of this application. It would simply mean that if planning permission was to be granted, the applicant would need to go through a separate procedure in order to have that highway stopped up. So we don't think, or we don't feel that the lack of disclosure of that opinion and/or the unclear status of the land at present would have any material impact on the planning merits of this application. I think the only other thing to say is Mr. Cornwell talked about, public liability for the surface of the 1.4 metre remaining sort of pedestrian route to the side of the fenced area. It's not a relevant consideration for members. It is something that would have to be considered outside of the planning process.
Thank you, Neil. I think what you're doing there is crystallising the focus on the planning application rather than some of the other considerations, which there are due processes to go through. Thank you for that. We do have some other speakers who would like to speak in objection to this application, and I have Val Standen and Ross Forbes are both. I have seen that Val Standen is with us earlier on. I'm not sure about Ross Forbes. So could we have some confirmation there, please, if you are both wishing to speak, or whether one of you are going to speak on behalf of both of you?
I understand that we're both to speak, but I haven't spoken to Ross since a few days. Is he there?
Is Ross with us? Ross, Mr. Forbes, could you indicate that you are actually in attendance? We're not getting anything back there, and the reason that I wanted to clarify that is that you will have been made aware that you have 5 minutes to speak, and so if you aren't sharing that between the two of you, then you do have up to 5 minutes to speak. Is it Mrs. Standen, or would you prefer Val? I don't want to.
Val is fine.
Val, okay, thank you, Val. So you do, if we don't have Mr. Standen, you do have up to 5 minutes.
Chair, sorry, if I can just intervene. I've seen a very puzzled Liz Brown, who I think is expecting to speak.
Yes. I'm not. Sorry, Councillor Brown. I'm not sort of going over your head. I'm just trying to clarify, because I hadn't picked up earlier on that we had the other two speakers in attendance. So I know full well that you're there waiting to come in now. I just wanted to clarify, and it may be that we do have Mr. Forbes before we come over to the next two speakers. So thank you for that. So Councillor Brown, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Chair. I'd have hated for you to have missed my pearls of wisdom.
Oh, certainly.
Good morning, everybody. I'm speaking today to ask you to refuse permission for what could be construed as a land grab, about which there has been considerable local disquiet. A little history. The site of the old Companions Club was granted planning permission on the grounds that it is a sustainable site close to public transport hubs. As such, the parking spaces were reduced. Then 3R found room for another flat and found that they needed more parking. Hey presto, these two bays were laid out outside the boundary of the property on Ainsley Street. I should point out, as Councillor Cornwell has said, that the rights of way officer has asked for the bays to be removed. Indeed, the committee report states in paragraph 69 that there is strong circumstantial evidence that this is highways land. The Miners' Hall also feels that some of the land is within the curtilage of the Miners' Hall. Certainly, ownership is in dispute. This area lies within the Durham City Conservation Area, very close to a Grade 2 listed building, the Miners' Hall. In fact, it is overlooked by it, as the applicant's heritage statement makes clear, and just down the footpath from the Floss Well, a non-designated heritage asset. As such, the area receives a great deal of protection from the Durham County Plan and the Durham City Neighbourhood Plan, which supersede the City of Durham Saved Local plans. Both the new plans are supported by the National Planning Policy Framework. Policy H2 of the new Neighbourhood Plan offers similar protections to both listed buildings and non-designated heritage assets, as well as the conservation area. The design of these parking bays is not in keeping with the area. The wooden bird's mouth fencing is obtrusive. The plastic car parking grid with the gravel inset does not echo any features within the area, and the white plastic chain is quite frankly nasty. Point K of Part 2 states development in the conservation areas should use high quality design sympathetic to the character and context of the local area and its significance and distinctiveness. This application quite plainly does not. Furthermore, this eyesore affects the setting of not one but two notable structures, which is in conflict with Neighbourhood Plan Policy H4. I would also like to draw the committee's attention to Policy T1, which gives a hierarchy of transport where cars are very low on the list. Paragraph 4.261 gives a list of questions to be considered when assessing car parking associated with new development, including, does existing street character rule out on-site parking? And are key local services conveniently and safely accessible by walking, cycling and public transport? The answers to these two questions are quite clearly no and yes. The new Durham County Plan also protects conservation areas and the setting of notable buildings within it. Policy 44 states applications in the conservation area must show respect for and reinforcement of the established positive characteristics of the area in terms of appropriate design, including pattern, layout, density, massing, features, height, form, materials and detailing. Referring to heritage assets, it asserts, development will be expected to sustain the significance of designated and non-designated heritage assets, including any contribution made by their setting. Policy 21 deals with sustainable transport, with paragraph 4.219 having a similar set of transport policies to the neighbourhood plan and a similar position on car travel. Before I finish, Chair, I must say one thing. If committee are minded to approve this application, I would ask that a condition regarding materials be set on this development, because you will notice that there are no conditions. This is a retrospective application, so you can see what's in front of you. This is a conservation area and deserves a sympathetic design. Rear streets in this area are surfaced with granite cobs. May I suggest a surface that mixes granite cobs with traditional paving slabs for the pavement area, and that the parking area is delineated by bollards such as those seen in other parts of Ainsley Street. Lose the bird's mouth fencing and the white plastic chain. The materials I've suggested would be far more in keeping with the conservation area and the setting of two notable heritage assets. So to sum up, Chair, I have quoted Neighbourhood Plan Policies H2 and H4, County Plan Policies 21 and 24, all of which are supported by NPPF Parts 9 and 16, in order to encourage the committee to refuse this application. I feel that Councillor Cornwall and I have put up very good arguments against it. But if you are still minded to approve, then I would respectfully ask that you consider placing conditions on the development so materials are more sympathetic to the area and the surrounding notable buildings, and that access is far easier. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Again, more interesting food for thought for the committee. At this point, I'll come back to Lisa and perhaps Neil as well. Lisa, is there anything that you'd like to come back with? Any further explanation of any points?
Just to clarify a couple of things, in respect of sort of ownership and land grab, they're not material planning considerations. However, the applicants did serve a notice in the press, which is the standard procedure if the owner of the land is unknown. So they have served the relevant ownership certificates as part of the planning application. In respect of sort of the impact on the conservation area, that is detailed within the report that we do feel it does have an acceptable impact as well as the heritage assets. In respect of materials, that would be a change in materials that would be for committee to consider if that's something that they wish to. That's all. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Neil, are there any points that you'd like to come back in with?
No, thank you, Chair. Lisa's covered the issue on ownership that I was going to mention, so I've got nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, we will come back to Val Standen, who's been very patiently waiting in the wings, and we have had confirmation that Mr. Forbes isn't joining us this morning, so it will be yourself, Val. So if we can move over to you now, please, to hear what you would like to say about this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll probably just sort of read what I have to say, really, as time is very limited. I represent the Friends of Flass Vale community group. We have over 200 members. And Flass Vale is part of it anyway, is a local nature reserve, which has been extremely important to many families in these past difficult months as a safe retreat for exercise and enjoyment. And it's not just local families, it's families who have come from around the county to enjoy this area as well. Our volunteers contribute over 1,000 person hours of hands-on conservation work each year. Ainsley Street and Flass Lane are part of a historic route running from the marketplace, Durham Marketplace, and then along the bottom of Flass Vale, and therefore the setting for access to the nature reserve. Now, although this street is within the conservation area, the lane had become rather dilapidated and neglected. There was a dump at one point of time, now gone, now built on actually. And therefore in March 2018, we, the Friends of Flass Vale, outlined a project to enhance the appearance of the area, which was approved in principle by the Public Rights of Way Department of the County Council. We then made contact with stakeholders such as the Miners Hall, and we met on site with their staff, who at that time were preparing a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund to renovate the hall, the buildings and the grounds which border Flass Lane. Their proposal included the removal of unsafe trees and some suitable replanting, as well as work on Flass Well, situated just beyond the parking bays now installed. Our plan was put on hold because the work started on the Companions Club. However, on 2 separate occasions, I gave a copy of our proposed project to the development site manager for their information, suggesting that they might like to support our project when their work was complete. Our proposed plan included retractable bollards at the entrance to Flass Lane to prevent, where the parking bays now are, designed to prevent cars parking there, but still allowing access for pedestrians and for any work such as tree felling or any emergency vehicles to the back of the Mowbray Street houses when they might be needed. The issue of 2 parking bays may seem trivial, but I would like to ask for your support for local people who have a long-term practical commitment to the area in their desire to reject the application and so maintain the semi-rural character of Flass Lane in the wider context of the nature reserve and the historic roads of Durham, and to allow better access as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. I'm sure the committee will feel benefit to everything that's been said this morning. So now we will move over to the committee. So committee members, if you've listened to what's been said, if anybody has anything they'd like to contribute to a debate before we take any vote, feel free to indicate by the chat function or indeed just by raising your hand. Councillor Freeman.
Thanks. Firstly, just to declare an interest, I am a member of the City of Durham Parish Council. They've objected to this application, but I'm not a member of their planning committee, so I've had no input into their response to this. But the reason I've got a question is that Councillor Brown raised an issue that said our rights of way team had actually told the developers of these two parking bays that they needed to be removed. And I know that we've heard some talk about how some of that's a legal issue, but I think if that is the case, I think we'd like to know that our own team within the county council have said these bays must go, because indeed these two parking bays have been built on land which is, by the sound of it, part of what's previously been highway. Thanks.
So, Councillor Freeman, are you directing that question to Lisa and perhaps Neil? Yeah. Lisa, is there anything you can shed any light on there?
I think I would ask Neil to come in on that, if Neil.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. I was putting it over to you both. Yeah. So, Neil, would you like to come in there, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The position is that whilst the public rights of way team maintain their objection to the application and would, in an ideal world, like the development to be removed, the strict legal position is that they're not in a position to require that legally, simply because it's felt we don't have sufficient evidence of its highway status. So that's why I think there's an objection maintained from highways, but also why the report goes into detail about why it is that we can't actually require removal of the structure or assert the land as highway at the present time. Now, clearly, that you have to decide the planning application on the basis of the situation at the moment. That could change in the future. But again, it's outside of the scope of the planning system to resolve that. There's a separate system under which that may or may not be resolved in the future. It's not something for members of this committee to try and resolve now.
Right, thank you, Neil, for clarifying that. We need to be, as always, focused on exactly what is in front of us at this moment in time. Councillor Bev Coult, you've indicated you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Bev Cole, Eshen, Whitton, Gilbert Ward. It's just a comment, to be honest, Chair. Obviously, I appreciate there's issues regarding the ownership, which are a different issue aside. But for me, it's a visual impact that this car park has got on the area. Obviously, it's a conservation area. It's very green, very heritage. But to me, it looks out of character. It just doesn't look right, and it has a negative impact on the area completely. And yeah, that's just a point I would like to raise, Chair. I think it's out of character with the area.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Paul Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the answer to my question is no. Do we have anybody from Design and Conservation at this committee meeting? Again, it might not seem to some people, but to my way of thinking, anybody that loves Durham, as most of us do, a very important application. Is there anybody in attendance from Design and Conservation, Chair, could I ask?
Ian, do we have anybody here from Design and Conservation?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair, no.
Not that we're aware of. Not that we're aware of, Councillor Taylor.
Chair, well, I would have rather have said this face to face, but once again, I find myself absolutely horrified that this will have a neutral effect. Those are the words from Design and Consultation. It does not have a neutral effect. It is, I know it's only 2 parking spaces, but I think listening to colleagues from the parish council and my colleague Liz Brown there, wonderful presentation, fantastic history going back to 1715, 1903. I don't think I was on those planning committees, Roger, but I just think we take such things too lightly. It is a conservation area. It's important to us. It's part of our history. And to plonk 2 parking bays as Sainsbury with, for heaven's sake, plastic chain around there, it's appalling. You wouldn't put it round Palace Green. Why would you put it round here? So again, Chair, I'm sorry to say this, nobody here from Design and Conservation, it has not got a neutral effect. I am really, really disappointed with that comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Would anybody else on the committee like to contribute to the debate? Councillor Davidson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sort of, on a practical point of view, I'm wondering the public rights of way are looking to try and find out whether this is a highway, what type of highway it is, blah blah blah. So my wondering is, if we give planning permission today, and they find out that it is a highway, does that mean that the applicant has to put it back to the way it was before? If they find out it is a byway or whatever, because that doesn't really covered in the presentation, and also it also says that they need to do it by 2026. Is there a time scale on this where we can defer it and they'll actually be able to find out sometime before 2026? Because I'll certainly not be a councillor in 2026. I don't know about anybody else. Oops, I've moved my screen about as well. So can we get some clarification on, 1, the timescales behind it, and 2, whether it gets dismantled if they do find out that it's a highway? Thank you very much.
Yes, I think on that point of how solid this application is, we'll come back to Neil. But just before I do, Neil, Val, you've got your hand up, but I'm afraid you aren't able to come back in at this point. So I'll just, if you can just remove that, please. So Neil, if you'd like to come in and answer some of those points.
Thank you, Chair. The bottom line is that the 2 things are entirely separate. So if planning permission were to be granted today and it was subsequently discovered through better evidence than we have at the moment that the land is indeed highway, the grant of that planning permission won't have any impact on that highway status. To answer Councillor Davidson's 2 specific queries, what would happen in those circumstances? Well, there's really 2 possibilities. Either the applicant could apply for a stopping up, which would operate to kill off the highway status, or the council's public rights of way and or highways team could, what we call, assert the highway. In other words, tell the applicant that because of its highway status, the structures need to be removed. So it would be down to either public rights of way / highways enforcement or a stopping up procedure. But as I've already said, that's entirely out with the scope of the application that's before you today.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. So there are things that can be done in any number of circumstances outside of the application today. Would anybody else on the committee like to contribute to the debate?
I've not gone through.
Yeah, it's annoying this the way these messages come in. I'm struggling to see who is next to speak. I'll go with Councillor Paul Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Lots of policies mentioned, lots of justification for this being removed, lots of great presentations. I'm drawn to policy 44, and quite simply, I'll read that to you, and you tell me if this particular application is compliant. Policy 44, historic environment, seeks to ensure the development should contribute positively to the built and historic environment and seeks opportunities to enhance where appropriate. Is any of that being applied here? If you can tell me hand on heart that it has, I rest, I'll sit back and listen. If anybody wants to tell me that it's in compliance with that, please speak now, because I don't believe it is. Thank you.
It's a very interesting point to consider, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Freeman.
Thanks. We've heard previously that this is a land grab. I'm quite interested in going back in time to presumably the applicants here are the same applicants that developed the Companions Club. I can't remember off the top of my head whether that is student accommodation or not, but at that time we would no doubt have decided that because of the sustainability aspect of that development, that extra car parking spaces were not required outside of the development site of the Companion Club. But here we have 2 extra spaces appearing to be built by the same applicant, which adds to those car parking spaces for that development. And I think that would have been against our original planning permission in the first place. So that does seem to back up that this is a land grab. If we talked about these extra spaces at the same time as the Companion Club had been seeking permission, we may well have refused it because of this aspect. So I think we should actually also consider where these spaces have come from. They've come from a developer who clearly perhaps hasn't been totally truthful in the first place when he developed the Companion Club site in terms of his need for car parking spaces. So here we have 2 extra car parking spaces, possibly taking over space that is highway. And going back to what Councillor Taylor has just said, I have difficulty seeing how this is compatible with policy 44 of the new County Durham plan. It certainly is doing nothing to enhance the conservation area of the city and of this area in particular. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. So, Councillor Davidson, you've been waiting patiently in the wings.
Thanks, Chair. I just didn't get the other half of my question answered before, which was how long is it going to take them to discover whether this is a public right of way, etc. And if we deferred it for a month, would they be able to find out? Obviously, Lisa's shaking her head, but nobody answered it before. She shook her head before, but nobody answered it, so I still wanted answering. Thanks.
Yeah. You do right to keep on until you get your questions answered, Councillor Davidson. So, Lisa, would you like to come in there, please?
Yeah, I'll come in on just a previous point that Councillor Taylor said, and then I'll let Neil respond to Councillor Davidson's. In respect of the conservation aspect, our report, the report at paragraph 50, does sort of mention that the development would change the appearance of the area, but that it is not considered harmful overall. Therefore, we do feel that it was an acceptable form of development in respect of policy 44.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So, Neil, there's a point for you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, Councillor Davidson, I didn't answer that. You're quite right. No, I don't think a month would be sufficient. I'm not sure what the time scale would be. We do have a rights of way officer here who can perhaps come in and speak about that. I would have thought it would take a significant amount of time and resource to search this further. So I think if what you're driving at is, could we have a deferment for, say, a month in order to get to the bottom of this issue, I think that's very unlikely that we would be able to get to the bottom of it within that time scale. But I'm quite happy to hand over to the rights of way officer, who can perhaps put some more meat on that answer.
Yes, I think that's perhaps relevant at this point, Neil, that we do bottom that one. So if we do have somebody here from the Public Rights of Way team, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Chair, it's Nick Howell, Senior Rights of Way Officer. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, thank you, Nick, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in response to Councillor Davison's query, the 2026 cut-off, which is mentioned in Lisa's report, that is a deadline for any applications to come in based on historic evidence have to be received by the authority before the 1st of January 2026. That date may be reviewed by the government, the national government, in due course in light of COVID restrictions and access to record offices, etc. In terms of applications we currently have on our books, normally we would receive one a year perhaps. Because of this cut-off date brought in by the government, we now have perhaps 10 arriving each month from different user groups. So at the moment we have over 200 applications sat being determined, being looked at by our definitive map officers. The timescale for determining these it's a piece of string at the moment. Primarily, COVID has closed all the record offices and made access to archives, well, nigh impossible at the moment. And each application requires in-depth looking at historic documents, maps, trawling through council minutes, etc. For us to make an interim decision, which ultimately people can object to when it gets referred to the planning inspectorate for determination, and their timescale is also along as a piece of string at the moment. You're looking at a year for them to simply arrange a public inquiry to look to discuss something. So short answer, a month impossible. We would keep it on our books. We would look at the evidence, search more evidence, and we would reach a decision in due course. And as Neil pointed out, we would reserve the right to go back to the applicant and say either remove your infrastructure, remove your posts, remove your surface, or apply for a stopping up. That is a simple answer, but we can't reach that decision until we have that evidence in front of us. Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to come back with there, Councillor Davidson?
No, that was great, thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that, Nick. So I take it from that whichever way the decision goes today, well, if we were minded as a committee to approve this application, you would still be able to come back when those deliberations had been concluded with whatever actions that you deemed necessary, and one of those might be to remove. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, Councillor, yes, Chair, that is correct. We could come back in the future at an unknown time. It is a risk on the applicant to have this hanging over their development. If it is proved, we reserve the right to come and seek something outside of the planning process in due course under Highways Act powers.
Yes, good. I think I think that sort of answered something. I wanted that clarified for the committee because it does actually nail a couple of points that people have been wrestling with there. So, Councillor Taylor, you've indicated you'd like to speak.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Lisa Marina for drawing our attention to paragraph 50. And if you can, I would recommend that members, my colleagues, now look at paragraph 50. And sorry, I'm going to have to read it out again, but it does tell me that the development has changed the appearance of the site, but the resulting impact on the designated heritage asset of Durham City Centre Conservation Area is as a whole is negligible and not considered harmful. I'll read that again. It is not considered harmful. I disagree. Don't know about you, colleagues. It is not considered harmful, and it therefore preserves the setting and character of the area. Again, I'll repeat, it therefore preserves the character and the setting of the area. Do we agree? It preserves the setting and character of the area. Food for thought. Thank you.
Interesting points. We've had quite a lot of debate on this application this morning, committee, and we've heard various pieces of advice. And I would suggest that perhaps can we move towards somebody putting a motion on the table to deal with this? Is anybody willing to offer a motion on this application?
Chair, I'd be happy to do that, and I see no other reason than to quote policy 44 for the reasons I've just outlined. It does not preserve the character and appearance of the area. Au contraire, quite the contrary, Chair. It is a dreadful thing to happen to this area, this much loved and much respected area of our city. So I would quote policy 44 of the new plan, and for all the reasons I've just indicated, and I see no reason to need to quote any further policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. So you're suggesting a motion to refuse this application. And Councillor Bev Coulter, you've indicated you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say I'm more than happy to second Councillor Taylor's recommendation, please.
Thank you. And just before we go to any vote, Councillor Freeman, you've indicated you'd like to speak.
I was just going to do exactly what Councillor Coates just done in supporting Councillor Taylor's refusal of this application. Thanks.
Right. Okay. Neil, you've indicated that you'd like to come in there at this point.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just before it's put to the vote, I would perhaps just like to clarify if there's any particular aspect of the development that members feel is sort of incongruous or has an adverse negative impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area or the heritage assets. You know, is it the development as a whole? Is it the materials, the wood, fencing, the hard surface? Is there anything in particular that you find objectionable, or is it just the sort of overall appearance of it?
Thank you, Neil. All what you've just mentioned: gravel, bird's mouth fence, plastic chain. Does it fit in with the historic character of our city? Do we really believe that? Okay.
Thank you for that, Neil. And I think the point of the exercise there was to suggest to the committee that rather than go for overall refusal, if you were minded to indicate any amendments, it doesn't look as if anybody is going to come up with that proposal. Sarah, you've indicated you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just quickly, following on from Councillor Taylor's citing of County Durham Plan Policy 44, there are similar corresponding sections of MPPF and Neighbourhood Plan as well. So it will be Policy H2 in the Neighbourhood Plan and Part 16 of the MPPF that members might want to consider alongside Policy 44 of the County Durham Plan.
Thank you for that, Sarah.
Chair, as the mover of the motion, I'm happy to accept that. I don't believe it's needed. All we need is policy 44. It is a good policy. It is strong policy. It will protect our city. But I'm very happy to add those policies which Sarah's mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. We don't have any other motions on the table at the moment, but Councillor Davidson, you've indicated you'd like to speak. We've had quite a lot of to and fro here, so is it some new point or what would you like to raise?
I'm not sure that it's a new point, but I just want to reiterate something that Councillor Brown said a half an hour ago or whatever about the parking spaces further up the street and on other streets that are quite sympathetic with the area, and these ones aren't in keeping with those. So I was just wondering if we can add something into the refusal to say that these aren't in keeping with the other ones on the street, on adjacent streets or whatever as well, because I think that's quite important. That even when we looked at the picture, there was some off on the right hand side, but they look absolutely nothing like the ones that were the ones that have been created here.
Neil, would that be permissible to put as reason for the refusal? That was part of the reasons for refusal, that the committee also objected to the appearance of those that were offered.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just an amplification, as I see it, of the reasons that have been put forward by Councillor Taylor. You know, it's visual impact essentially. So I don't see any particular problem with a reference to a lack of sympathy with the other car parking provision in the immediate surrounding area. I mean, if if the planning team leader's got any other observations on that, I'm happy to pass over to her for that.
Well, I think we could, as it's been asked, and I think it's a very strong voice coming from the committee. I think it is something that could be added into the conclusions, going back to the applicant as to, you know, on an aesthetic way. So if we can move to the vote now, please, Neil, I'll pass that over to you to go through the committee. We don't have any other motions on the table, only the motion from Councillor Taylor, supported by Councillor Berfield, to refuse the application.
Thank you, Chair. So again, I'll come to members and ask if you're for or against, and this is for the motion to refuse the application for the reasons that have been put forward predominantly by Councillor Taylor. So I'll start with Councillor Brown. Are you for or against?
I'm against the motion. I support the planning officer and I would like to see approval.
Okay. Councillor Corrigan, are you for or against?
I'm for the motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Colt?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lang?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Manchester?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson?
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Shuttleworth?
For the motion.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Taylor?
For the motion.
Okay. Chair, that's 10 in favour of refusal and 1 against.
Thank you, Neil, for clarifying that vote. And so on this occasion, this application has been refused, and we leave that to the planning team to work with the applicant. So thank you for that, committee. I don't know if anybody needs to get a drink of water or anything like that at this juncture before we continue on. I think I will, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee, for that decision. For your information, I'll be pursuing, and the Parish Council will be pursuing, the rights of way issues with the rights of way department. In fact, I've had an email from Nick this morning on that very issue. So thank you, and I'll leave you now.
Thank you, Mr. Cornwell. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm sure we'll see you again probably next month. So bye-bye. Keep safe.
Bye.
Now then, committee, we'll move on to the third application of this morning, and that is item 5C, and that is land to the northeast of Grange Farm in Old Cassop. And this is demolition of agricultural building and construction of 7 holiday let units with associated car parking and landscaping. And this presentation will be given to us by Planning Officer Paul Hopper. So Paul, if I can pass over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I think we're just about still in morning. Just waiting for that presentation to upload, and then we'll get started. Can I just check before I start that everyone can hear me, can see the presentation?
I can.
Excellent. Right. So as Chair mentioned, this application relates to the demolition of existing agricultural buildings and the construction of 7 holiday let units, and that comes with associated car parking and landscaping. So the application site is located on the eastern edge of Old Cassop, which is a small hamlet to the southeast of Durham City, and is currently occupied by former agricultural buildings, although it's understood that these are now redundant. And it's also located within the Old Cassop Conservation Area, an area of high landscape value. So this slide shows that satellite image. So Old Cassop sits within a predominantly rural setting, which you can see from that slide. And as such, the application site is framed by farmland to the north and east, by a cluster of residential dwellings at Old Cassop to the west, and a single residential dwelling to the south. Access to the village is taken via a single width lane, both from the west by the A688, from the north via the A181. So this slide shows the site access with the existing buildings behind. The wall on the right hand side of the slide delineates the garden of the nearest residential dwelling. So this slide is the view looking west out of the site towards Old Castle, and the junction which serves the existing site and also the adjacent dwelling to the left of the slide or the photograph. So this slide shows part of the existing buildings, and the hedge on the right hand side of the slide denotes the position of the public right of way which crosses the site coming towards the position of the photographs being taken from, and terminates at the site access. So this slide shows that view from the bridleway which cuts across the southern part of the site, and you'll see its route bears left to the rear of the two cars that you can see in the photograph before it moves towards the site access. So these two photographs are taken from the eastern boundary of the site looking west towards the existing buildings. The photograph on the left hand side, you can see within the centre of the slide the gable elevation of the nearest residential property, and on the right hand photograph you can see gives you a sense of how that site sits in the wider landscape and as the land falls away to the north. So this photograph is taken from the site access looking north along the unclassified road, and again it represents how the land falls away to the north before it rises again at the base of Silent Bank, which members will know is the A181. So this is a photograph looking east towards the unclassified single width lane which provides the main route through Old Castle, and you can see the buildings towards the centre of the photograph. So this photograph is taken moving west out of the village along that unclassified road, and members will be able to see from that photograph that it's a single width lane, and that's what you can see in that photograph is one of a number of bends along that route. And this is a photograph taken from the north of the site looking south along that single width access lane again, and the trees you can see, or the cluster of trees that you can see in the distance there is the rough approximate position of the site. So finally, this is the last of the photographs that I'll present today, and it shows a view across that valley, if you wanted to call it that, from Silent Bank. And again, the cluster of trees, you can just about pick out the lane that moves up the bank side there, and the trees at the top of that on the left hand side of it is the rough approximation of where that site, or where the application site is located. So the proposals relate to the demolition of the existing buildings and the construction of 7 holiday let units, and they would broadly occupy the position of the footprint of the existing building, as you can see there, and set around a central courtyard. Access would utilise the existing arrangement with the unclassified road to the west, and that was understood to have served the previous agricultural use. Areas of parking would be provided to the south of the buildings, which members can see, and soft landscaping to the north, which is a terraced arrangement given how that land falls away. And the committee will see from that slide as well the soft landscaping proposals that are included as part of the development, and that includes a native species hedgerow around the site and some additional tree planting as well. 2 existing trees would be lost to the development, and they exist on the western side of the buildings as they are now. That's a result of the demolition of those buildings, but it is proposed to be replaced by some replacement planting. So these are the floor plans. See what's proposed are 7 units with varying capacity, and you can see from the previous slide that there is external space provided for the enjoyment of those units as well. So these are the elevations. In terms of design, the buildings provide accommodation in the roof void, so a 2-storey, but have an appearance of single storey or 1.5 in places. And they would include windows in a gable elevation and conservation style roof lights. Just to pick a point up at this juncture, on the bottom set of elevations at the left hand side, I should note that the committee report should have included a condition which required the submission and agreement of privacy glass to that balcony. That's just to provide extra privacy for residents of users of the unit, and also the nearest adjacent property to the south there. I do have that condition in draft at the end of the presentation, so members can review it for themselves. So external materials would comprise a mix of prantile and slate to the roof, natural stone facing brick and timber frame windows, it'd be timber canopy posts, and fascias. So that's just a final set of proposed elevations, which give you a sense of what the development would look like if members were minded to approve it. So this is a 3D representation or visualisation as provided by the applicant. It shows the completed development in situ. The only thing I would note to members is much of the landscaping features that are shown there that aren't retained would take a period of time to establish. So that's the tree the main tree that you can see the right hand side of the access and the hedgerow as well. That would take a period of time to establish. So in terms of responses from statutory consultees, the Highway Authority raised no objection to the application, subject to planning conditions requiring the installation of new passing places along the unclassified lane and the upgrade of existing spaces. A specification for those places have been submitted, and members will note that it's referenced in the condition in the report. I would note, with apologies, that the report is missing a condition which was at the request of the Highway Authority for a traffic regulation order to be obtained to the junction with the unclassified road and the A181. What I will do for members to give you an explanation of that, this is the arrangement with the A181 to the north of the site, and members might be familiar with that particular road into and out of Durham. What that traffic regulation order, or TRO as I would refer to it for speed, is that this junction here, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, presumably not.
No.
Yeah.
We can't
Okay.
see
Well,
it.
it would be the western access, and what I'll do is I've got it on Street View there. So that would be a no entry arrangement secured through condition for a traffic regulation order, and what you would have on the eastern junction would be a prohibited right turn from the A181 on this route. Again, I've got that reflected in a condition at the end of the presentation, and I'll keep that up for members, or I can put it back up if members would like to have a closer scrutiny of that after the presentation is finished.
Yeah. So in effect, Paul, that is making it's a one-way in and a one-way out.
Yeah, effectively.
That is on a bend. Yeah, that's the access is on that bend, isn't it? With the property, a residential property, just to the left off the shot, isn't it?
That's correct. That's correct. Just as we would have gone past it had I moved along Street View. Yeah. So that would be you would enter that junction moving westerly along the A181, and there would be a no entry on the other point of access that I showed a moment ago. So I'll just skip back to the consultations and I'll go through the remainder of those. So in terms of other responses, Castle Conquarting Parish Council object to the application. They raise concerns regarding suitability of the development for that location and highway safety. The Environment Agency has not commented. The Northumberland Water and Durham County Council's drainage section offer no comments to the application, or offer no comments to the application. So in terms of internal and non-statutory consultees, these raise no objection to the application subject to conditions that are listed in the report. However, the Campaign for the Rural Protection of England have raised objection to the application, citing concerns regarding highway safety and the impact upon visual immunity and Orcassup conservation area. We have had a number of objections to this application from residents within Orcassup. We received two after publication of the report, so to give members an up-to-date representation of those applications, we have 12 letters of objection, and these have been received from residents, and we've also had 3 representations from local councillors, and they cite the following concerns. So they're concerned that the development would have an unacceptable impact on highway safety from increased traffic, and in doing so they noted that the narrow single lane nature of that lane that I showed in the presentation there. They also are concerned that it would have an adverse impact on the public right of way, residential amenity, the conservation area, and that the development is unsuitable, or it's an unsuitable location for this type of development. And the development would not promote healthy communities, and it would have an adverse impact on local wildlife and biodiversity. They're also concerned at the impact that transient visitors would have on the community of Old Castle, and they also raise concerns as to how that remaining farmland would be farmed once those buildings had been removed. So just to move on to the key points, policy 8 of the County Durham Plan in terms of the principle of development. Policy 8 of the County Durham Plan provides a policy framework in support of new visitor accommodation where it meets stated criteria. And this broadly accords with national policy, as I've outlined in the committee report. The policy, i.e. policy 8, requires new visitor accommodation in the countryside to meet an identified need or be an extension to an existing facility. So in respect of, and that it respects, the character and the character of the countryside and demonstrates clear opportunities to make the location more sustainable. So in relation to need, members will note that the application has received basic support from Visit Durham, and in terms of maximising opportunities to make the site sustainable, the development does include a considerable amount of cycle and parking or storage for visitors, and it has good public rights of way, links to the network to the south of the site. So in terms of highway safety and the public right of way, the development would result in additional movements on the surrounding road network, and the application was accompanied by a highway statement. This proposes mitigation in the form of the passing places that I mentioned a moment ago, in terms of their response and the upgrade of existing spaces, and also the arrangements in relation to the junction with the A181. Those measures, as I've said, can be secured through planning condition, and colleagues in the Highways Authority are satisfied that those would mitigate any adverse impact of the development in highway safety terms. So in terms of the impact on the public right of way, whilst the development would introduce vehicles along this part of the route, it's noted that this was the case with regards to the previous agricultural use. I think concern has been raised that it would amount to a breach of Section 34 of the Road Traffic Act, and sought comments from colleagues in public rights of way, and also the Highways Authority that wouldn't be the case. In terms of the impact on the conservation area and the area of high landscape value, the scheme was subject to the Council's pre-application advice, and what they've proposed in this instance is reflective of the comments that came back from the Council's landscape and design and conservation sections. Members will see from the comments in the report that the design officer, or the design conservation officer, considers that the development would have a beneficial impact on Old Castle conservation area through the removal of those agricultural buildings that are there at present, and replacement with what they consider to be a sensitive redevelopment of the site. Any landscape and visual impact upon the area of high landscape value could be mitigated through an appropriately designed landscape scheme, and again that could be secured through planning condition. The development would introduce 7 holiday let units in a rural location, and as such would have some impact in terms of increased noise. The noise management plan has been submitted in support of the development, and this has been reviewed by colleagues in environmental health. The development has sought to mitigate any impacts in this regard through its design, and there are details listed in the report in terms of further mitigation, how the site would be managed, and control over external areas within the development proposed as part of that. Colleagues in environmental health are comfortable that if we secure that through planning condition, which is reflected in the report, then they would have no concern. I mentioned during the course of the presentation the condition requiring the submission and details of the privacy glass as well, and that's something which we secure through planning condition. I'll pop those up at the end of the presentation, as I said. So in terms of all of the cases, or all of the issues, sorry, the impact of the development could be mitigated through conditions as detailed in the report. So in summary, the development is considered acceptable in principle and one which could be satisfactorily accommodated by reason of its size, scale, mass, layout and appearance, in accordance with the policies that are listed in that slide of the County Durham Plan. In addition, the development is considered to meet the requirements of the paragraphs of the NPPF that are stated there. Policy 44, which was mentioned in the previous item, in section 72 of the Planning Listed Building Conservation Area Act. The concerns of residents and local councillors has been considered as part of the proposal, but on this instance, on the basis of consultation responses and consideration through the course of the application, they weren't considered to of sufficient weight to justify refusal of the application, and any issues or the impact could be appropriately mitigated through the imposition of planning conditions. And those are the two conditions that I'm proposing to amend to the report, Chair. If members would like to take a moment to have a look at that, they can do so. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to pop those back up. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. That's a very comprehensive report, and I think it is worthwhile taking a few minutes just to read those additional conditions that you've outlined here.
I would say, Chair, as well, sorry, those have been agreed in principle with the applicant, who I believe is represented at the committee today.
Right. Right, thank you for that, Paul. I'm sure we'll be asked to come back to that at some point in the discussion, but we'll move ahead. We do have several speakers, as you've mentioned. We do actually have all three of the ward councillors who've registered an interest to speak on this item this morning, and not wanting to, to pick any short straws out. What I intend to do is to just go in the alphabetical order. And so I'm going to ask Councillor Jan Blakey to speak first, who will be followed by Councillor Stuart Dunn and then Councillor Maura McEwen. So Councillor Blakey, if you can speak now, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. Well, I would like the committee to vote against this application because of the impact it'll have to the residents. It's a historical hamlet of which we haven't got many and should be preserved at all costs. We're having traffic issues already in the area. There is no footpaths for pedestrians or for the bridleways or cyclists. It's an absolute nightmare driving around the roads. The national panel policy for building in the countryside, it goes against that. There's no, I don't think there's been any thought to the design actually. It just doesn't fit with wherever's there already. It's just, that's just my thoughts. Mm-hmm. There's no investment into the local community with what's going on either. The sideways, the passing points are not upheld by the county council or the highways. That's done by the residents themselves. They maintain them. We've had accidents with delivery wagons up there because it's a single track. We've had wagons go off, literally off the road. It's just not really sustainable at all. The nearest shop is 4 miles away. There's nothing at all to support the area of what's being developed. The only people who will enhance is the developer. Nothing at all for the existing residents. You know, I'll quote Councillor Taylor on his policy 44. You know, it doesn't enhance the area at all. And conservation is not just about Durham City, it's about all our other little bits around about as well. They're as important as what Durham City is. So I'd ask the committee to, and the 181, if there is an accident on the 181 with the extra traffic what's coming off there, all accidents on that 181 because of the speed, and they're not doing 60, they're doing about 8 miles an hour down that stretch, they usually result in a fatality. So I would seriously ask the committee to consider this application. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, Chair.
You're very welcome, Councillor Blakey. Thank you. We'll move over now to Councillor Stuart Dunn. I know you're waiting in the wings there, Councillor Dunn. I know you do have a prepared speech, and you also have some footage for the committee. So I'm just going to ask you to be mindful of the time with the footage, but I'm sure we eagerly await your information. So over to you, Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to show you a brief video of the roads which we're talking about. It's a 10-minute video, but it's not going to take 10 minutes. So this is the entrance from the Silent Bank onto the single place road. And you'll see there's a car just gone off the right-hand side of the screen, which I've had to stop for to give way and reverse down this single track to give way to this. This track to the first passing place takes a minute, and this vehicle coming forward just gives you a context of how wide the road is or not, but also the verges and what it's like for cars going through this. We'll fast forward along this, but you'll see how windy it is and how narrow it is. And as Councillor Blakey just said, there have been accidents. That's the first passing place, an entrance to a field, and one delivery vehicle actually toppled over onto another car that was waiting on this road. It's steep, it's bendy. But the passing places which we're coming up to are something to behold. I don't drive this road frequently. I'm driving at 20 miles per hour here, but I'm driving cautiously. But if people are driving at night in adverse conditions, that's an entrance to a field on the right-hand side, which is also used as a passing place. If it's dark or wet or snowy, this road's treacherous. The passing place, which is signed on the left-hand side, is a joke. It's not a passing place. And again, the next passing place on the left-hand side, how vehicles get past on this road, I just don't pretend to understand. Indeed, when I took this video the first time, I had to do it again. I was stopped at the second passing place because there was a flock of sheep coming down. Again, passing place on the right-hand side. This one's actually not bad. That's what the first one that I'd consider was a proper passing place, but the video's now been running for 2.5 minutes, and that's how long that narrow one-track road is up into the village. And now you're coming up to the farmhouse on the left-hand side, and you can see the detritus on the road. It's a working farm on both sides of the road, and then you turn into the hamlet itself. And this just gives you a perspective of how small the hamlet is. You can see at the end of the road the development site, and on the right you've got houses, on the left you've got houses, and then the entrance ways are very obstructed. That's the development site on the that's going to be extremely visible as you come through the village, and then you turn out the other road into this development through towards the A181, and you'll just see that road on the horizon. It's a dual carriageway going down a very steep hill at 60 miles per hour, so people trying to get past trucks, and then it narrows to one lane just before this Y junction where the highways officers are requesting a traffic regulation. You can see walking on these footpaths on the left-hand side is absolutely not possible. And on the right-hand side, you do so with difficulty. Sorry, just skip you back there. I'll just skip you forward again. That's the junction coming down from the A181, and this is the junction onto the A181. I've gone down into second gear, and now I'm going down into first gear to do a hill start to stop at the junction. And I'm now looking back over my shoulder to the traffic coming down the bend and at speed. And you can see that truck going past. So I got out there, but that's not an easy junction for people to take. I've now turned around and I'm going back towards the only amenity within the area, which is the Three Horseshoes. But that's a considerable distance away. And again, walking down the verge to this or cycling is just not possible. I'll fast forward through this bit if you like, but you'll see all the bends on this road. This road is a fast road to Peterlee, and then you get the junction to Cassop, and you can Old Cassop, and you can see the lane coming off. I'm indicating well in advance because I know where the junction is, and slowing down so that traffic behind me doesn't rear end. But looking at this, the junction that you're getting into is very hard to see. You've got traffic coming round a blind bend at speed. It's a 60-mile-per-hour road. People will come there at the speed limit, and then you're down into a very, very steep dip, and then back up into the village along that one track. You've got a passing place coming here, and this is the experience you get where you can't see what's coming. I'm driving past the passing place, and all of a sudden, thankfully, I'm just there. I can pull in and actually let this car pass me. But in adverse weather, this road is treacherous. It's not a gritty route. You can see just there coming up a pile of grit on the right-hand side, and that's what residents do in the winter. This is the development site coming up on the left-hand side, and you're turning right into the village. Getting more people using these roads is really not desirable. You can see that the sort of it's a beautiful little place, but all of these accesses are very hard to see. Just coming up on the left-hand side, there's some brown gates, diagonal entrance. That resident had their car written off by a car coming through here at speed. We've just driven over some speed check things which have arisen from a recent meeting with local councils. I'll speed through the village a little bit and just see the passing places in the opposite direction. So it gives you an idea of how poor they are. That one's okay, but coming up on the right-hand side, it's a joke to call these things passing places, and these are supposedly having been upgraded by the 2015 planning application. That is not planning a passing place. How anything would get past that is just absolutely a joke. Again, this one, it's an absolute joke. I'm just going to quickly whiz down the road, and you can see somebody taking their life in their hands, walking, and I'm going to whiz down the road, and again, somebody coming up to having to give way for me. So thank you for indulging me there. I'm not going to say an awful lot more. I am going to reference a number of the paragraphs in the report. And what I've done is I've extracted wording from the report in red, and my comments are below there. This, as Jan said, this development brings virtually no benefit whatsoever for the hamlet of Old Cassop. The only acceptable remediation for Old Cassop would be demolition of these unsightly barns and restoration of the countryside. This development does not conserve the historic environment or any historically valuable buildings. It proposes unacceptable growth to a hamlet, which inevitably will be converted to permanent housing. Policy 8, there is a need for this kind of visitor accommodation. Don't deny that, but just not here. It doesn't make Old Cassop more sustainable in any way. And I fear if this, oops, sorry, I just lost that. I fear if this application is approved, that compliance with the proposed conditions 15 and 16 on the installation and upgrading of passing places will again be circumvented if approval is granted. All this additional traffic from this development, in my view, cannot safely be accommodated with the enhanced passing places, and respectfully for all of these reasons stated, I'd request that this application is refused. I'll just finish by reiterating the comments from one of the residents, Yvonne Ryle. Old Cassop will be changed forever, and out of 25 households, 12 will be owned by the applicant. Is this to become his own personal hamlet? This will give him more leverage for the slew of future applications which will surely follow. Old Cassop will no longer be valued historically as one of the few remaining agricultural hamlets, but as a holiday park with no amenities and a treacherous road running through its heart. Thank you very much for indulging me.
Thank you very much, Councillor John. I think that was a very innovative and interesting presentation that you've delivered there to the committee. I do have to bring up the rear with Councillor Maura McEwen. Councillor McEwen, are you ready to give your representations?
I am ready, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to start by congratulating officers on the very creative spelling of my name in the report. I prefer it the way that they've done it, much more interesting than the one on my birth certificate. Old Cassup is a lovely, small agrarian community with a big problem. It's the kind of problem that affects many long-established rural communities. It's an absolute nightmare to get to. As my colleagues have said, there are two roads into the village, one from the A181, a fast-moving main road that I'm sure we all are familiar with, and the second is from Redbriar Bank, which is the road between Quarrington Hill and the Bowburn bypass. I'm a governor at the school up at Cassup, which is actually in the village of Quarrington Hill. And let's just say that there are lots of conversations between people who drive to the school and the school itself and local residents about the times when that is an appropriate road for the vehicles going to the school to use. It's very narrow, fast and steep. It has poor visibility, lots of frequent leaves and detritus on the roads that can make it treacherous in the winter. As my colleagues have said, the roads to the village themselves are single track, narrow and enclosed by ancient hedgerows. We already have frequent issues with traffic on that road, particularly between Redbriar Bank and the hamlet itself. The road from the A181 is virtually impassable during winter, and the road from the bypass has an ongoing fly tipping problem. Loads there can include ball bearings and other materials that are dangerous to motorists. You really have to know this area to drive it safely. And if you're coming to stay in a holiday home, the chances are you're not going to know that area. If you're using a holiday home as a base for exploring the local area, you'll be travelling back and forth all the time. You'll be increasing pressure on these roads that are already not fit for purpose. There are no bus stops near the village, no footpaths, and if you want to get into or out of the village, you have to use a car. As said before, the village lacks all amenities from plumbing to shops and pubs. We as an authority have already recognised this problem. 5 years ago, planning permission was sought on the same property by a company of which the current applicant is a director. That proposed development was a conversion of existing barns to new residential use. As a statutory consultee, our Highways Department made the following comments about the road between Old Cassup and the A181, that the intensification of use of the Y junction would create considerable concern for safe movement of traffic on the A181, which is already subject to road safety concerns. Officers then note a previous fatality on the site and the unsuitability of the location due to the aforementioned lack of local amenities. Permission was eventually given with an explicit condition that the developer install a network of passing places on the road between the Bowburn bypass and Old Cassup. DCC agreed the plans for passing places in 2016 and building commenced, but these passing places hadn't materialised, and according to residents, they were only recently seen with any works undertaken. In the current application, officers are minded to approve, provided the applicant upgrade the 5 existing passing places on the road to the Bowburn bypass and create 2 new ones close to the junction. It feels a little bit like deja vu. We're assured that this outcome can be controlled by the wording of the condition, but clearly when a near identical condition was given to a near identical approval for basically the same applicant 5 years ago, the wording of the condition didn't protect the village for several years, and residents have had to live with the consequences. This application is more concerning to me as a local member than the application from 5 years ago. That application was for dwellings. This is for holiday lets. Holiday lets mean a higher volume of traffic, more travelling, drivers who don't know the area. If you're building dwellings, at the very least, you're going to have people who'll learn how the roads around there work, but not if you're having people coming every week and different people at that. Even with the inclusion of more passing places, the road would remain too dangerous for 7 holiday lets worth of tourists to use on a regular basis. And even with the TRO, the concerns about the road to the Bowburn bypass would remain, and the displaced traffic from the TRO would have to move to the other road. I hope that the committee will recognise the unsuitability of this location for holiday lets and deny permission.
Thank you for that, Councillor McEwen. I think the committee have been given lots of information there to consider alongside the report from Paul Hopper. Paul, I'll come back to you at this point for you to, you know, to clarify any points that were raised there. So if we can go over to you.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Thank you. I think it's only right that I start with an apology to Councillor McEwen for the error in the report in terms of the spelling of the surname. So my apologies for that. Having been a hooper and a hopper in the past, I understand how upsetting that might be. So
That's okay.
That is duly noted. Just to move on to the points then, I think Councillor Blakey had suggested or raised concerns about sustainability. So sustainability in terms of policy aid, it is appears at sort of part 1 subsection F, where visitor accommodation in the countryside is required to demonstrate that it does or demonstrates clear opportunities to make its location more sustainable. I think in the presentation I referenced access to the wider public rights of way network to the south of the site, and that was weighed in the balance and in consideration of the development and sort of demonstrating broad accordance with that policy. So it's worth mentioning that sustainability in that sense is covered by policy aid. In terms of the footage that Councillor Dunn kindly provided us with, I think it speaks for itself. I suppose the only thing I would point out is that the return manoeuvre back onto the unclassified road from the A181 would be one which would be prohibited through the TRO. So that manoeuvre, which I think Councillor Dunn has had concern about, wouldn't be permitted through that TRO. In terms of the removal of the buildings and that being the ideal scenario in terms of improving the conservation area, I would suggest it's probably unlikely that anything would be done in that regard without the associated redevelopment of the site. This scheme delivers that, and I suppose I'd just refer to the design and conservation officer's comments in terms of the beneficial impact that he thinks that it would have on the conservation area as a result. The only other thing to mention, and I suppose I don't know if Neil might add to this in a moment, possibly not. There was a proposal, I think it was 2015, for the conversion of an agricultural building to the south of this application site. That was granted consent with a condition which required upgrade and installation of passing places along that western leg of the unclassified road. We did have an enforcement case which reported the occupation, because I think the condition was tied to occupation, that the site was occupied or the development was occupied prior to those places being installed. That was raised with us, and works were undertaken in 2019 in December, so relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. That was investigated by our enforcement section, and we were satisfied that the requirements of those conditions had been met. Having said that, and this is where I think Neil might provide a firmer view, this application is based on its own merits in this instance. There is mitigation proposed, which we've secured through condition to overcome those on the advice of the Highway Authority. And so I think that's something which we need to bear in mind, and Neil might mention in more detail. There is a slight difference in terms of how we've worded the condition in this instance. So it is pre-commencement, so it's no development shall commence until those passing places are installed rather than occupation. So it's the commencement of works, and those spaces need to be in and usable. So I think that covers everything, Chair, without going on too much.
Thank you, Paul. I will bring Neil in at this point. And Councillors Dunn, I say that you've got your hand raised, but unfortunately I'm not going to allow any further speakers to come in at this point. We've had quite a lot of representations this morning, so we will hear from Neil next, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to reiterate really what the planning officers said, there is a previous enforcement history in connection with the passing places on a previous permission. That's not directly relevant to the merits of the application that are before members today. I mean, I suppose all I would say is I think members have to operate on the basis that any conditions that were imposed, if this application was to be approved, would be complied with. And clearly, if there's an issue of non-compliance in the future, that's a separate matter for the relevant enforcement team. I think that's probably all I can say on that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, Neil. We do have another speaker registered who's been waiting very patiently in the wings, and this is a local resident, a lady called Dawn Love. So Dawn, I understand you are with us at this meeting. If you'd like to come in now.
Hi, good morning, June. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you do have 5 minutes to speak if you'd so wish to take, and Martin, one of our committee services people, will just give you a little nudge. So now the committee are over to listen to you, Dawn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. So yeah, I represent the residents of Oldcastle, 8 of whom objected to this application. And I just wanted to speak to the councillors, really, because I imagine that one of the reasons that you all became councillors was to represent the communities that you live in, and I imagine to try and make a difference to the lives of the people within County Durham. And today, the decision that you will make will have an impact on everybody living in Oldcastle, and it isn't a decision that I took lightly to speak today. You know, I'm outside of my comfort zone. I'm not a NIMBY. If this development was smaller, didn't have as much traffic, or was in a different location, I probably wouldn't object. In fact, other development within Oldcastle I've supported. And my son actually goes to school with the applicant's son, so it isn't something I want to be sitting here today doing. But I feel that every day when I take my kids to school along that road that, you know, Councillor Dunn showed you, I put my kids and my life at risk, and that is with the existing level of traffic. In the winter, there are so many accidents. The last 2 winters, we've had vehicles piled up, vans overturning. My husband's car was actually written off, and the accidents that Councillor Dunn and Councillor Blakey referred to at all. It's really important to say as well that there were no speed restrictions. So when you saw the image passing through the hamlet, that can be 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. It's an established rat run. And that was a contributory factor to some of the accidents that we've had. Now, there's been a lot of talk about these passing places and whether they should or should not have been installed. Now, for me, those passing places do not deal with the root cause of the accidents that we've had so far on the road. The accidents, when we consider them, and we actually had a highways meeting at the beginning of the year, just before lockdown, to talk about the road risk, because 90% of the residents actually went to that meeting. The root cause of those accidents are drivers not knowing the road, not understanding the risk, and too many vehicles for that. And it isn't really a road, it's a farm track. Yesterday, I went on the way up from the A688 and I was there for 25 minutes waiting because there were sheep coming down the road and then some missing sheep. So this road traffic order to prevent going in at the top of the A181 is going to have such an impact. That should really be open to consultation. It shouldn't be part of a planning condition. And if you think about the scale of the development, you've got 7 holiday cottages, up to 6 bedrooms, 15 parking spaces, so that's 15 vehicles. You've got potentially up to 22 vehicles because there's 22 bedrooms. So if you had a multi-generational family, or if you had lots of friends there, can you imagine that amount of traffic on that road? And as the councillors have said, there's no services, there's no pub, there's no, you know, if they want to get a pint of milk or a paper, that journey is by car. So nothing in this application supports policy number 21, which is sustainable development. There is nothing sustainable about putting that level of traffic on this scheme. And I think it's a fatality waiting to happen. And it's okay for a highways consultant, you know, sitting 300 miles away in Milton Keynes, sitting quite cosily on their computer to look at this application and think, yeah, those passing places are okay, they're going to reduce the risk. But it's not. And I think that nobody in their right mind would approve or support this application if they had to drive this road every day like we do. And as I mentioned, yeah, there's no evidence. You know, policy number 21 says that there needs to be evidence that the level of traffic from a development can be safely accommodated. There is nothing to me in the application or the planning report that demonstrates how that level of traffic can be accommodated. It also contravenes policy number 10, which talks about development in the countryside, which says that it would not be acceptable.
1 minute remaining.
There is prejudice to highway safety. Policy 8, which talks about holiday accommodation, will be permitted only if it's appropriate to the scale and character. The visitors are going to outnumber the residents. You're going to have 49 visitors as opposed to 45 residents. You've also got the public right of way issue, in that there is 15 car parking spaces that will be accessed along the public right of way. Again, it's another accident waiting to happen. You're going to have vehicles coming in and out at peak departure and arrival times. And to summarise, I just wanted to say thank you for listening to our concerns, and it's not an exaggeration to say that your decision today could save lives or it could further endanger them. So I just wanted to thank you and just call on your common sense, because the underlying thing for all planning policy is the National Planning Policy Framework, which talks about sustainable development. There is nothing sustainable about this scheme in terms of the scale of it, the amount of traffic, the sustainability. There is no services, and it's going to cause absolute misery every day for the people who live here. And there is no benefit to the community at all. There wasn't in the 2016 application. We had no application, no benefit. There is no benefit for this one either. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. That was a very impassioned contribution, and I'm sure that the committee have welcomed the additional items that you've wanted to raise there when they come to their deliberations. Councillor Dunn has indicated that there's something he wants to bring up with the planning officer about the traffic order. Now I'm going to allow this. So if Councillor Dunn, if you want to quickly come back in, and then Paul, you can answer this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to avoid confusion, which Dawn's got and Paul has got there. The return journey I did there, I turned right off the A181. That right turn will still be allowed. The traffic regulation order which is proposed would prevent turning from the next right-hand turning at the Y junction. So I turned at the first turn of the Y, the western end. The traffic regulation would stop a right turn at the western end. So you will still be able to turn off the A181 and get to Old Cassop that way. I just needed to confirm that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that, Stuart. Paul, is there anything you need to add there?
No, if members wanted clarity on that point, I know David Smith from the Highway Authority is present, so it might be something that David might want to.
Yeah, I think that's useful, Paul, if members want to consult David about that in the future. So we do have another speaker. Before we go over to the committee, we have a Mr. Joe Ridgen, who is speaking on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Ridgen, are you with us, and have I pronounced your name properly?
Yes, and yes.
Yeah. Right, so you also similarly have time to speak, and our officer will indicate if the time is drawn to a close. So if you would like to give your presentation now, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application today. Old Cassop is ideally located to support the visitor attractions of County Durham, with fantastic views of Durham Cathedral and just off the new Northern Saints walking route. With easy access to the city and the coast, it's an ideal location for the development of luxury holiday accommodation. A lot of time and effort has gone into ensuring that the right scheme is before you today, in compliance with Policy 8, and we are grateful for the support from Visit County Durham during the development of the scheme. These holiday properties will bring people to the area, helping support the nearby tourism and hospitality businesses which have taken such a hit recently. This diversification project came about due to the current buildings becoming surplus to requirements. Given the site's location, there was an ideal opportunity to invest in alternative development to support the wider business, helping cushion any future changes to the UK farming economy. High quality design has been integral to the proposals, which have been landscape and heritage led from the outset to ensure we enhance the area. The proposals have used both current built form and historic plan form to inform and inspire the scheme, ensuring that the proposal reflects the existing historic context in terms of scale, massing and materials. We welcome the comments from the Design and Conservation Officer that the proposal would result in a beneficial impact and net gain to the character, appearance and significance of Old Cassop, which is fully in compliance with Policy 44. During the application, additional landscaping has been proposed as part of the scheme to address the comments from the Landscape Officer. As set out in the application, the properties will be responsibly managed to minimise any adverse impact on local residents. When booking, we'll be able to advise on the best route to the properties. We'll also provide welcome packs, which will set out expectations for the guests in terms of respecting nearby residents. The packs will also provide an opportunity to let them know about local attractions, facilities and services in the area. The concerns from neighbouring residents in relation to potential highway impacts have been addressed from the outset, with additional passing places proposed as part of the application. The type of use will have the least amount of impact during peak hours, and holiday makers are unlikely to be using the road during morning and evening rush hours, and there'll be no school runs. We've proposed that these additional passing places are in place prior to commencement of development, which can be controlled by appropriately worded condition. In addition, the Council have requested a further highway improvement to be delivered as part of this application, which are detailed in the highway statement dated October, and the TRO as discussed earlier, which will be conditioned. We welcome the request to change the road priority, which will benefit existing residents and future visitors. These road improvements, which would not otherwise have been delivered, will mitigate both the impact of the holiday accommodation and address some of the existing issues that residents experience, which members have heard about today. To conclude, there's a huge demand for more holiday accommodation in the county. Tourism is an important part of the local economy, and this development will be a benefit because of the increased spending averages for visitors staying overnight. The scheme is a high quality and will result in the enhancement of the conservation. This development accords with local policy, specifically Policy 8 and Policy 44, and national policy, and will help support the visitor economy in County Durham, including the beneficial impact on the local area through new jobs and increased spending, and delivering the highway improvements. We therefore respectfully request that members approve the application before them, subject to the proposed planning conditions. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you for that offer, Mr. Ridgeon. And the committee, it's now over to you. We do already have somebody quick off the marks, Councillor Paul Taylor. I'll go over to you now, please, to hear what you would like to say.
Thank you, Chair. What a contrast those last two speeches were, can I say, first of all. I think, Chair, I'll be as brief as I can. I've had a good run this morning. Sometimes it's a classic case of what looks good on paper is totally different to the reality. And can I say thank you to Stuart Dunn and to Jan Blakey and to Maureen McKeown, because, and can I also say sorry? Because I read this and I thought, this looks great. This looks a good idea. It's going to provide something here which we haven't got. Now, I do know the 181, I travel it regularly, but I've never been down that road. And I have to tell you, if we had a site visit, it would be impossible because we couldn't get down there. And I'm not the most confident driver in the world, Chair. If I was going down there in the snow, I'd probably get out the car and leave it. I was quite horrified. I mean that sincerely. I was horrified by the state of the roads and what it would take to get there. And then when we got to the village, Stuart, and thank you so much you did this. I am so appreciative because you've totally changed my mind. Absolutely. When we got to that lovely little village, I thought, how wonderful. And my mind was changed completely. It's not sustainable. It's nothing of what the applicant has said. I take the contrary view to everything that was said by the applicant. And though he mentioned welcome packs for people who would use these cottages or whatever you want to call them, there was no mention of local people whatsoever, which disappointed me. So, Chair, my opinion of this on paper is completely different to the reality. And I thank all speakers for what they said on this, and thank you for opening my eyes. And can I say sorry? Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Taylor, and it's just another important vindication of why we have a committee to consider these items. Now, I have got more speakers registered to speak now. Councillor John Shuttleworth.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I'm not against development in the countryside by any means, but what I see there, you know, listen to the residents, what Councillor Blakey and Councillor Dunn said, it's in the wrong place, and you've got to refuse it on the basis of it's just wrong for that particular area. You know, so an accident waiting to happen, that's been said. But you know, if it was somewhere else, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But that access in and out of there and the amount of development there is not right for Old Cassop or the residents there.
Thank you, Councillor Shuttleworth. Now, I do have Councillor Audrey Lang, who's indicated she'd like to speak, but I've also had an indication from David Smith, who is one of our officers waiting in the wings there. So, David, can I bring you in now, please?
Afternoon, members. Dave Smith, Highways, in replacement of John McGargill. Yeah, I've heard some of the issues raised by the speaker and some of the members about traffic to the proposed development. Now, I want to put some sort of perspective on this in terms of it, the holiday destination, what sort of traffic it would generate. Now, the A1M junction 61 would probably likely be the most sort of that would be the area where most traffic will come from for tourist visitors to the area. Now, they would obviously come through the A68. A688 and along through the unclassified road where these indivisible passing places are going to be provided. Now, the seven indivisible passing places going to be provided along that route, which will benefit the residents and all users around that area, all road users, you know. And in terms of those passing places that John McGargill has agreed to, in terms of the construction, they're going to be the full road construction. And that will enable vehicles to pass each other. They'll be 5.5 metres wide, and they'll be 18 metres in length. Now that ultimately will benefit everybody, highway safety in that location. So in terms of its impact, it would be a positive impact, and it would make it safer for the existing residents. Now, the existing residents down there, there aren't many. There's just a scattering of housing down there. And looking at the volumes, there's very low volumes on the unclassified road, both from the A181 and from the A688. Now, those volumes are only very light traffic. Now, I know that the member showed us video footage of him driving around there, and there's nothing that's unusual about what he was driving there. It's like atypical country roads all the way around the county. Now, that's what you do. You drive to the conditions. You give way to people. Now, obviously, on the back of the TRO, that's going to be improving that junction to the north of the site in terms of the right turn manoeuvres that are going to be emitted from that, and also that in the past we've had anti-skid barrier systems put in there, bollards, all which have improved highway safety at that location. Added to the fact that that there's been a reduction in any accidents in that area, and I've checked accident statistics through the unclassified highway, and there's only 2 accidents. Now, 2 accidents over 5 years does not give rise to a significant highway safety impact, considering how little this development would operate in terms of trip distribution from this development, which would be very low. So as I say, you've got lower volume traffic, you've got journeys out of the peak traffic time. You've got the mitigation in terms of the A181 junction improvement, and then you've got these indivisible passing places. Now, adding all this together, there's certainly you couldn't claim this to be a significant highways impact, and an inspector would certainly not refuse this on highway grounds. So, as I say, that's my opinion, and I'll leave it to you, members.
Thank you for that information, David. Councillor Lang, you indicated that you'd like to come in and speak.
I would like to, Chair, thanks very much. I agree totally with what Paul Taylor has had to say, but I would also like on record to congratulate the 3 local members. In fact, watch out, Stuart, Hollywood might be ringing you, just to put a little bit of niceness on this. No, I'm in total agreement with Paul, Chair, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Now, members of the committee, we've had quite a lot said and information given to us. Are we at the point where anybody would like to offer a deliberation as towards putting forward a motion? Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Chair, just get my on mute. Chair, what Dave Smith had to say there was great, and it was very informative, but I didn't understand it. I've got to be honest, I didn't understand it. Passing points and strips and this, that, and the other, without physically seeing it, without having evidence like Stuart Dunn provided, I find it difficult to make a decision. Yeah, you know, my mind is coloured by what Councillor Dunn has done. Of course it is, because I found it horrifying. I said that in my earlier statement, but what the highways officers just had to say was obviously relevant, it was professional, and it was well thought out, but I didn't understand it. You know, and that's me being candid as I always am and honest. I didn't understand it, and I could not get my head around what he was talking about. So at this moment in time, I'm struggling to make a decision on this one. I don't have enough evidence. It would have been wonderful if our highways department had took the lead from Councillor Dunn and provided both roadways for us to see, because I think, taking aside the fact that this lovely little hamlet's going to be changed forever, we need to see these roads. We need to see how people would access and leave the village. So I'm really struggling to come to a considered decision, Chair. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Now, I actually have a couple of questions and nobody's raised them up to now, so I feel I do need to put them forward, and actually they would come to you, David. I know you want to come back in to speak, but my first question is, the TRO that we've been given information about, is that going ahead anyway? That isn't conditional on this development being approved or not approved. That TRO is going ahead anyway. I would like to know the answer to that. And the point of the additional passing places, are they only on condition of the application being approved? And will anything else be done about ensuring that the passing places that we saw indicated on that road, which are quite clearly not passing places?
That's right, yeah.
You know, what is going to be done about them in the light of, you know, the information that we've been given? So the TRO is going ahead anyway, and the additional passing places, which David mentioned, were going to be super duper and much wider and longer. Are they only conditional on the application being approved?
Very good point.
Over to you, David.
Very good point.
Sorry, councillors. I had a bit of a technical issues there. Yeah, in terms of the pass and place provision, now that's been looked at by the Highways Department, by John McGargle, Highways Development Manager, and those pass and places have been set out on a plan, which Paul Hopper's got a copy of on there, the locations. There's 7 in total. And they're all in place so that obviously there'll be a safe operation of the unclassified road to the development site. So there is a plan there for those places, and I'd have to get a steer off the planning officer. But I think they're pre-commencement. So that's a condition that those adoption standard passing places will be put in place. In regards to the traffic regulation order to the north of the site, there's been dialogue with the police in our traffic department about that TRO and banning that right turn. So that in terms of its position, I would have to chase that up with my highway colleagues to see where that's at. But before this development would commence, we would want to ensure that through a granting condition would be put in place to alleviate those manoeuvres off there. But as I said to you before, in my last, I'll put this over to you, that a lot of the trips will be from the A1M Boburn direction. They'll not be using that route that much, you know, so a lot of the traffic will come from the west to the development. So as I say, that mitigation secured on top of the passing places overall, how could we say that would be a severe highways impact because of the light traffic volumes that's along that lane and the fact that there's low accident statistics along the unclassified lane? So as I said, the only thing I can point out is at this moment in time is that we would want these passing places put in. The TRO done and all that's secured before the development it comes into place for holiday customers, because ultimately residents will be affected if these weren't put in place, you know. So we would want to ensure that these are all built to highway standard and done through the proper processes in terms of its regulation order, stopping that right turn manoeuvre. So as I say, that's our position from the Highway Authority's angle.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. And Paul, you want to come in, but I don't feel you've actually answered the first question I had about the TRO. So perhaps you can, Paul. Is that going ahead anyway? It's not conditional on this application, and I do think you've answered the question about the other passing places, though, David, that they will be they'll only be going in on condition of this application being approved. So Paul, I'll come over to you now. Can I just point out, Councillor Taylor, you're not on mute. Yeah, so Paul, if I can come over to you now, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just to reiterate David's point in the first instance that the provision of the passing places are solely tied to this development. So without that, you know, there's no function there or no mechanism there for those to be provided. So it would have to be provided through this development. I think in terms of the TRO, that is something that you know it will be brought forward through condition as part of this application. To my mind, I don't think there's anything any application being made outside of the planning process. Whilst it is a process which sits outside of planning, I don't think that's being brought forward by anybody else at this point. So it would be you know, through the application that it would be provided. Yeah, does that clarify the point for you, Chair?
No, not really. So despite the fact that the police have said this is a dangerous turn, that TRO is only going to come into play if this development goes ahead. That's the absolute crux of it. That TRO will only go ahead if this development is approved. I don't think I'm the only one on the committee who want to know the answer to that.
As it stands at present, and if David wants to come back in, then he's obviously able to. But my understanding is that that's the case. Yeah,
right.
It only comes forward as part of this, unless you know, application is made by the council directly, or whoever it might be.
Some other form, right? Thank you, Paul. Neil Carter, you've been patiently waiting to come in, so I'll bring you in now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just a point of order, really. I can see that some people are making comments in the chat function.
Yes.
So it was just to bring that to your attention, Chair.
Yes. Yeah. It is going to be something I think we're going to need to deal with through the procedures of these meetings, actually. But yeah, I'm not bringing those people in. People have had an opportunity to speak, and so we're now moving on. This part of the meeting is the committee discussion solely. So if people can desist in putting those comments on there, please. If you're not part of the committee and you're not indicating that you'd like to speak, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Now then, we do have Councillor Audrey Lang, who's a member of the committee, who would like to speak.
Sorry about that. Can I ask a question of Dave Smith? Because when he answered the question about accidents, he said there'd only been 2. But I watched Dawn Love just shaking her head. So obviously they know more accidents have happened there than what Dave Smith does. So is it possible that we could go to Dawn and ask her?
I think, Audrey, we've just answered that point, that it isn't relevant at this part in the meeting to be going back to previous speakers. I think we can make our own judgments on what we've seen. Okay. Anybody else on the committee who would like to speak, please? Councillor John Robinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I did put it in, so obviously I've made a mess of putting the RTS in. Chairman, it just shows this morning the value of, I think it was Paul Taylor said, the value of us having site visits and the fact that we long for them coming back. I would like to propose refusal on the grounds of highway safety I found John Love's presentation as a resident compelling. I think the effect upon the residents is such that there is going to be more people coming to these facilities than our residents, and therefore on highways and impact upon the residents, I would move that we refuse, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Robinson. Now, I do have a couple of people who want to speak, and I need to do this in order. So, Councillor Bev Coult, I need to take you first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, if I may, Chair. Do we have confirmation that this establishment, if it gets permission, is actually going to be open all year round? Or obviously it makes reference to holiday season. Is it a 12-month open area, or is it going to just be seasonal? Just if we could have some clarification, if we may.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. So, Paul, can we have a quick answer to that, please?
Yeah, no restriction in that regard, Chair. Only restriction that it not be occupied as a sole resident.
Right, so you can take it from that it will be open 12 months if people wanted to book it. Right, thank you. Councillor Lang.
Second John Robinson's proposal, Chairman.
Right, thank you, Councillor Lang. Do any of the members of the committee, Neil, you want to speak? No.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. It's really just to caution members against a refusal based on highway safety. Clearly, the decision today is for members to make, but I need to make members aware of the risks that we might face on appeal, given the professional officers' view as to the impacts in terms of highway safety. So you have had technical advice from the principal highways development officer. His view is that if I understand it correctly, is that the highway in question is lightly trafficked. There's not going to be a significant additional number of vehicle movements associated with this development, and in any event, the mitigation by way of the proposed TRO and the improvements to existing and additional parking passing places, will sufficiently address any of those impacts that might arise. As I've said on many occasions, highway safety issues are quite technical, and it is quite difficult to sustain a reason for refusal based on highway safety, which is contrary to the professional officer's advice. I'm not saying that members can't. I'm simply making you aware that we could have significant difficulty sustaining that reason for refusal on appeal if it is refused for that reason.
Thank you, Neil, and that's entirely relevant and proper that you do that and keep the committee well informed. So over to back to you, Councillor Robinson. I mean, what reasons?
Chair, I still think I do apologise. Sorry, finish, Chairman. I do apologise.
No, I was finished. Thank you. Over to you.
I still believe what was said to us by the resident, and I've forgotten the lady's name, I do apologise, that the impact upon the residents of this community, the fact that there are a limited number of people in this community, and I think the fact that it will affect their whole livelihood, their whole lifestyle, their whole life, is still enough for me to believe it should be turned down. And Councillor Mrs. Blakey, I think it was Jan, quoted Councillor Taylor's referral earlier on to policy 44 in the Durham County Plan, where she said that this is a similar situation in Oldcastle, but it is to Durham City. The policy 44 would apply. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on the committee wishing to speak? Now, Councillor Taylor, you seem to have abandoned the chat function altogether, but I can see that you've indicated to speak, so I'll move over to you now.
I haven't pressed the arrow, Chair. I do beg your pardon. I did type in my RTS. We have a very short 3 or 4 line statement from Highways. We've had a really good presentation from Mr. Smith there, and I'm going to reiterate what I said. It makes me sound foolish. It makes me sound foolish. I do not understand what he's talking about. because I can't physically see it. I heard mention of a document or indeed a map of some description being passed to the planning officer, but I haven't seen that. And I'm going to, sorry, Neil Carter, I'm going to counter what you've just said. I will go against what Highways have told me because I don't understand and I haven't physically seen the evidence of what is being verbally told to me and the very short paragraph in the report. I don't understand. I can't comprehend what David Smith is talking about because I haven't physically seen it. So on those grounds, I think, Neil, I have a strong case because I don't understand what has been said to me and I haven't physically seen it on a map, on a graph, or on a whatever. Excuse me, if it makes me sound foolish, so be it. But that is me being really honest. I can't really say, yes, you're right, that'll make it much safer, because all I've heard is we'll put 2 passing places in and that's it. Sorry.
No, your opinion's as valuable as anybody else, Councillor Taylor, and we should never feel that we're being foolish when we speak from the heart and say what we you know, and give questions back. Now, Neil, you've indicated that you'd like to come in again here, so it's obviously something very relevant. So, Neil, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was simply to say, if Councillor Taylor's saying he doesn't understand some of the technical advice that's coming from the Highways Development Manager, and/or you may need some further advice in order to come to a reasoned view on this. I'm just wondering whether it's one of those rare situations where the best course of action might be to defer for any relevant additional information to be forthcoming. I'm just concerned about members making a decision if they're saying that they don't fully understand some of the Highways issues here.
Thank you, Neil. Paul, you want to come in?
Yes, Chair. I think Councillor Taylor made reference to a plan. A plan was submitted with a revised highway statement that formed part of the application pack, which was available online to view. I do have that plan now, and if it's as simple as looking at points on a plan to see where those passing places would be, then I can share that now if it would assist. If members don't feel that necessary, then that's that option is there, I suppose, is the point.
I think if you've got that information, Paul, I think the members are, I know this has been a tremendously long meeting and members have, we've had a lot of information to absorb, but if you do have something which would mean that we could make a more informed decision on the vote,
absolutely.
Please show, if you can show us that now, thank you.
Share that now, Chair. Was that plan shared with the committee? Yeah, excellent.
It has, Paul, but and I can see your cursor, so if you could, I'm speaking from a member of the committee point of view, if you can talk us through the relevant road systems.
Absolutely. So this is the western access on the unclassified road moving east. This is the application site, and these are the existing passing places which to which David was referring. Those are existing. These are the 2 proposed spaces. So if you continue this way, you come to the roundabout with the A688. So that is the track that the route of Councillor Dunn's video started and completed on. So he went straight through Cassop up to the A181 and came back again. So those are existing spaces. Those are 2 proposed spaces, and all of those spaces in terms of the upgrade to those would be up to the standard that David mentioned when he described those points. So if it was as simple as, where are these points on a plan, hopefully that's provided some assistance. If there's still any doubt, I accept that, but I thought it was worth mentioning just for members to be able to have sight of that. So with your agreement, Chair, I'll stop sharing that now unless you want it to remain there for.
Well, if you can leave it up, thank you, Paul. And just to put a bit more meat on the bones for the committee, what are those passing places going to be designed from, and how will they physically, how will they look? Can you give us that information, David? I'm sure something was mentioned about width and construction.
Yes, Councillor. In terms of the construction makeup of those, you'll have your surface course, which is your wearer course, your tarmac, your base course, and your subgrade. and that'll be for road construction makeup, and that'll be widening those sections of the lane out to 5.5 metres, and then you'll have 1 and 3 tapers at each end, and then there'll be signs to say pass in place. So obviously, with the signs, along with the overall widths, the highway standards, they'll be drained as well, positively drained. They'll improve safe two-way traffic flows along there, which I've already said are very light traffic movements anyway, or just over 100 vehicles.
Yeah, thanks, David. So are we only talking about those 2 that will be altered to those specifications, or are we talking about all of them?
All seven, it to be upgraded to that standard. So 18 metres in length. So that's for a tractor and a trailer to pass each other, where appropriate.
Right. That does give quite a bit more information. Thank you, Paul. You want to come back in?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Just for data protection reasons, given that's a share screen, there may be some sensitive information pop up at some point. So if members are finished, I think it's probably best if I stop sharing.
Yeah. So yes, if you want to take it off, right? Thank you.
Thanks.
Now then, so I will come back to the committee now. We do have a motion on the table to refuse this application from Councillor John Robinson, seconded by Councillor Audrey Lang. So do we have anybody else who would like to speak, or anybody wants to discuss this situation further, or any alternative motions? And we don't have anything at the moment. So Neil, I'm going to go across to you now for the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Before I put this to the vote, could I just check that Councillor Taylor feels that he has sufficient information now to come to a view on this? I just don't want to put it to the vote until we sort of get to the bottom of that.
If I may, Chair, and can I say thank you the guys for what you did there. That was really helpful. If that had been done to begin with, that would have, I probably wouldn't have asked that question. So the answer to your question is, Neil, yes, it was very helpful. It just remains now the significant change to the lives and the amenity and to the history of the village, which is in my mind. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for that confirmation, and I do agree with you actually that information would have been very useful. It would have saved quite a bit of discussion. So Neil, sorry if we can come over to you for the vote now.
Yes, okay then. So this is a vote upon the motion to refuse the application contrary to the officer's recommendation for the reasons that have been put forward. And I'll start with Councillor Brown. Are you for or against that?
Against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Corrigan.
I'm for the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Coult.
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Against the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lang.
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Manchester.
For the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Shuttleworth.
For the motion.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Taylor.
For the motion.
Chair, make that 8 votes to 2 in favour of refusal.
Yes, thank you, Neil. We seem to have lost Councillor Freeman somewhere off along the way there. But thank you very much, committee. So that application has been refused. So that concludes the items on the agenda this morning. And Item 6 on the agenda, such other business. Well, I haven't been notified of any of the business actually that needs to be discussed at this meeting, so it just falls to me to thank everybody for your presence. Thank you very much, everybody who's spoken, everybody who's contributed to the debate, and thank you very much for the officers for all your work in preparing these reports. Thank you very much. So we look forward to seeing you next month at the Planning Committee. So if we can, members of the council, if you can just wait until the IT chap indicates that we finished recording, but all other guests feel free to leave now if you so desire. Thank you.
Well done, Chair.